get started. Not exactly at 9:30, just to get those few extra folks time to get logged in.
Okay, Martha, I'll go ahead and start the recording right now. I want to remind everybody that this sim will be recorded, so you will be on the recording if you speak. Okay.
And we'll capture your Q&A in the recording.
That is correct.
Our attendees will not be able to speak, so it'll just be the panelists that are going to be speaking. So you just got to be careful what you put in writing, because that will be captured. So our numbers are still climbing. So Brandy's going to be the first person that's going to speak and introduce the sim, but it's getting close to 700. And I don't know, Brandy, are you able to see that, or is it just Marshall and I as the co-hosts that can see those numbers?
I do not. Well, I see them at the bottom. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So I'll give them another minute or two, and then we'll turn it over to you to kick this off.
And as a reminder, make sure that you're putting your questions and answers in the Q&A, just in case the chat doesn't go
turn
away.
Off.
Yes.
Our goal is to turn off chat.
Yes.
So type your questions in the Q&A. That is correct. And Teresa Tabarez, you are welcome. It's our honor to be able to provide this opportunity, this meeting for everybody, because we know it is crazy times, and we'd like to provide you all the answers that we can. Unfortunately, as you will see as this unfolds, there may be some things that we just don't have answers for, but we'll do the best that we can. And we'll probably say that multiple times, that we're not able to, we don't know all of the answers for everything. Okay, Brandy, we're up to, it keeps growing, but we're up to 730. So it's now 9:32. So I say, let's go.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It is April 7th, 2020. You are attending the CALPADS information meeting, where we shove lots of information down your throat for the next 3 hours. Next slide, please. Oh, you can download the presentation from the resources link that was on that first slide. The things that you need to know about Zoom is that obviously if you're having trouble with your audio, you can call in. So down in the bottom left-hand corner, you should see a little microphone. You do have the option to switch to phone audio. At the point where you switch to phone audio, it'll give you a number, and you can call in through a landline. Obviously, a lot of the internet connections around the state are a little spotty, so it's sometimes better to call in from a landline. But for the best session experience, connect using a network cable rather than your Wi-Fi. Next slide.
I'm trying to manage my own environment here. I got multiple screens, so yes, I'm trying to get us to the next slide. There we go.
Okay, so we would really like for you to wait to ask questions in the Q&A box when we actually specifically ask for them. So you definitely want to click on the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. And in the send to drop down, select the presenter, type your question and hit send. But obviously there are going to be specific times where we're going to ask for questions. And so we'd like you to try and hold your questions until those times. Otherwise, the people answering the questions don't actually have an opportunity to sort of listen to the content and get an idea of where the presenters are. So we're going to respond to as many questions as we can in the time permitting. And so Sue Ann says there's no option of send to presenter. So is it, Marshall, is it send to panelist?
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Panelist.
It would be the panelist.
Yeah, so it's send to panelist. Okay. Any unanswered questions we'll try and answer in either an upcoming flash or potentially frequently asked questions. And then if you have a really detailed question that only pertains to your LEA, please submit a service ticket. We don't, obviously, because we have over 800 folks on this webinar, we do not have time to answer really specific questions. Your best bet is to submit a service ticket so that one of the client services reps can work directly with you. Okay, so our presenters today from CDE, can I get a drum roll, please? Paula Mishima, who is the administrator for the EDMD, the Educational Data Management Division. Myself, Brandy Howdige, I'm the technical lead for EDMD. Shiloh Duncan Bessariel, the administrator for special education. And then from FICMAT-CSIS, we have Angela Ratty, who is the client services architect, and Martha Friedrich, the client services officer.
Operating these slides for everybody.
Yes.
Hope it goes smoothly.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think, is it my turn, I think?
It is.
Yeah, go for it, Paula.
Okay, so this is Paula, and I'm going to take the next 27 slides or so. I just wanted to make a little comment that this sim, we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to have Shiloh, now that CASEMIS is officially all in CALPADS, we're going to have little special guest star appearances of Shiloh throughout the presentation. She'll take a few slides here and there, specifically on special education. So that's a little bit of a change. But before we get to the presentation, we just wanted to give one quick CDE personnel update. Our previous deputy over our branch was promoted to be a chief deputy. So that's Stephanie Gregson is now our department's chief deputy, leaving a vacancy in the deputy position. And then the new CALPADS administrator of the CALPADS office is Glenn Miller, replacing Karen, who moved to a different unit. But I'm going to give Glenn a little chance to introduce himself. Glenn?
Hey, good morning, everyone. So this is Glenn Miller. So as Paula mentioned, I just about 6-8 weeks ago moved over to become the administrator for the CALPADS office at CDE. Prior to being at the CALPADS office, I was part of the Education Data Office, which is next door to the CALPADS office, and helping run federal reporting for California, and then also part of the data reporting unit, which is part of accountability. And prior to coming to CDE, I worked on a project for CDE for 8 years as a manager for West Ed. And so I ran the Title I Part C data collection, the statewide data collection for Title I Part C, and built this information system for that. So, and way back in my history, I worked for PowerSchool. So that's me in a quick nutshell. And I'll get back to the really important stuff of the sim.
Great, thanks, Glenn. And we're really happy to have him. He has a lot of great background, even having worked for a student information system vendor. So we're really happy to have him on board. Okay, so turning to the agenda. I'm going to start off with some basic CDE updates and then go through some of the key changes for 2021. Yes, 2021 will happen and hopefully things will be back more to normal. So we wanted to give you a heads up on what's changing so that you can prepare. Then Angela is going to do the CALPADS support update, going through the main changes for the end of year submissions. I'm going to come back in for a little bit of a discussion about the ODS poll for the graduation rates. And then Brandy's going to do her end of year checklist, which is something that she does at some of the more regional sessions that she holds. And sprinkle through all of this, Shiloh will kind of pop in here and there to give some slides on students with disabilities. And then Angela's going to end it all with some support tips. Okay, so going with the CDE updates. First of all, I just wanted to emphasize, and Superintendent Thurman always emphasizes this, is that while we all have our work to do, the emphasis and the important thing is to keep yourselves and your staff and everyone healthy. So that should be, preeminent in your minds, that as we do this, just remember that's always the priority. At the same time, we know all of you guys are out working out there really hard. We see all the chatter on the listserv, and so we know that many of you are working hard from home and still doing all your work. And I think one thing that's become really evident here at the department and the CALPADS office, as we try to be able to provide you information about the submissions and so forth, is that often we can't, because all the data that you all help submit to CDE is the basis for so many important things that we have to wait for others, the U.S. Department of Education, the State Board of Education, the governor's office, to make decisions before we can make decisions. So that just emphasizes how important the work that you all do is. And having said that, though, it almost feels a little odd for us to spend a couple hours talking about life as if it were normal. But the truth is, at some point, things will go back to normal. And at that point, you all will have to be submitting the data. And there's a lot of changes that are happening for this coming end of year. So, and we know that some of you are out there wanting to ready yourselves as much as possible. So we will be spending a lot of time talking about, what's coming, as if things were normal when we know that they're not. So having said that, what I wanted to do, first of all, is share with you what we do know and what we have, what the department has officially announced. Hopefully you all have seen the press release by Superintendent Thurman, where he basically says that school is not going to be reopening this year. It doesn't mean that even though the school buildings are physically closed, school is open in the sense that kids hopefully are still learning through other means. And the department recently, if you've checked our website, has put out a lot of information about distance learning. So the bottom line is, at least we can all plan that school buildings aren't going to reopen, so we can all focus on moving towards distance learning models. Next slide. With regards to statewide testing, we've also announced that it's suspended for CASP. It's also suspended for the summative LPAC, and it's postponed for the initial LPAC. It is expected that when schools do reopen, that kids who should be taking the initial LPAC will be tested, but the deadline for testing them has been increased to a total of 75 days. I will say, with regard, the couple things that are being discussed is with regards to the summative LPAC. They're discussing whether or not to make that available again when school reopens, so that students can be tested and potentially redesignated. But whether that's going to occur and the timeline on that is still being discussed. And it's still being discussed as to when, what the initial LPAC will look like when it does reopen, because initial LPAC going online on July 1st has definitely been moved. So those are still things that are being discussed, and we'll let you know as soon as we know when they make those decisions on testing. Okay, next slide. With regards to the end of year submission, I know this is the big question everyone has: what will happen with the end of year submission? As you've probably read, we did receive a preliminary waiver from the U.S. Department of Education regarding federal assessment and accountability requirements. What we're waiting for now is a state executive, basically an executive order from the governor releasing the responsibility of doing the school dashboard for 2020. That has not occurred yet. We're hoping we'll have word of that within the week. And as soon as we know, we'll let you know. I kind of think it's likely that that will occur, but regardless, we are not officially kind of released from doing the school dashboard for the state. In the meantime, you all have an opportunity to provide comments or questions regarding the waiver we have received from the federal government. And there's a link there as to or where you can submit any comments you might have. Okay, next slide.
Paula,
yeah.
Paula,
This is who?
this is
Shiloh.
Shiloh.
Go ahead, Shiloh.
Great. I just also wanted to kind of pop in and just inform everyone that although we did get a waiver, a federal waiver for ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, we do not have a waiver in any form for IDEA. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is currently still in effect, and all of the reporting requirements still exist within that law. That can only be changed by an act of Congress. So I just want everybody to kind of be aware of that although we are having a waiver for ESSA, the IDEA information is not currently waived.
Great, thanks, Shiloh. That's helpful.
And Shiloh's going to speak more to that as the slides progress.
Great. Okay, next slide. The department has been putting a lot of information out on our website. So this is just orienting you guys to that and to check the website often. The most recent post that will be helpful to you is guidance on grades and graduation. I know there's been some amount of chatter on that on the listserv. Unfortunately, in terms of CALPADS, it probably doesn't impact CALPADS as much as it might impact your student information system vendors. And I know on the last call we had with them, they had lots of questions about that. So, anyway, you can look to the guidance for that on our website. Okay, so just really clearly, I realized when we're reading through all the slides, it might get confusing as to what we're saying we know. And so I tried to put it all on the next two slides in terms of what we do know right now and what we don't know. So in terms of just submitting data, not talking about submissions, but just submitting data now through the end of the year, as we had said in a flash, to the extent that you are able to keep your own student information systems up to date with enrollments and exits, that you should keep CALPADS up to date with those same enrollments and exits. Meaning when kids enroll, then follow up with the SINF, the program, the CELA, and this SPED files, and then obviously exiting students that do exit during this time. You will need to exit all students at the end of the school year as we've always done. So that's for the end of the year. And if you fail to do that, obviously you'll get CVRs in the fall. But all of that part, you just still need to keep CALPADS up to date to the extent you're keeping your student information systems up to date. When this end of year submission window opens, you should submit what data you have. CALPADS is a longitudinal data system. So regardless of the fact that we pull data and have you certify it during the different submissions, the data is also there for students and as students transfer to move that information around for those students. So it's still important to submit data on an ongoing basis to the extent that you have it. So once that end of year submission window opens, you should just submit the data that you always would submit for end of year. We don't know if there'll be any exceptions for any category of data with regard to, we're going to say, okay, you don't need to do the submission, but right now, just, if you have the data, go ahead and submit it when the window opens. In terms of certification of the end of year submissions, as Shiloh just mentioned, end of year 4, which is the special education, it's the new special education certification submission will still be required, and it will be required, certification will be required. We do not know yet if end of year 1, 2, and 3 will require certification. And should the end of year submissions 1, 2, and 3 require certifications, we don't know if the deadlines will change, whether all or some of the data will use for state accountability metrics, whether all or some of the data will be publicly reported. So that's what we know and don't know as of this moment. So as you ask questions, just remember, we don't know for some of these questions. Okay, so turning now a bit to the to these submissions. first, congratulations on submitting your Fall 1 submissions. We're really pleased with how that worked, given that it was the first time you were submitting special education data to CALPADS and requiring, you know, that the CALPADS to certify. You guys did an absolutely great job. Pretty much almost all LEAs got in. We had just a couple little folks, but aside from that, it was a great job. And I know it was really hard, and we really appreciate the work. So with regards, go ahead.
So we have a few questions, and they're specifically about exit dates. So what?
Well, we might get to those, Brandy, in the next couple slides. So why don't we hold off on those and see if they get answered?
Okay.
Okay, so this slide just reiterates what you all know already, which are the current deadlines. As you know, Fall 2 was moved to April 24th. The other ones are still the same, though obviously they're subject to change. Okay, next slide. And this is just a graphic that kind of paints that picture of all the different submissions and the different deadlines. So it's kind of one picture you can look to. With regards to Fall 2, since that was moved out to April 24th, it obviously impacts the submission, us giving data to the Commission on Teacher Credentialing for assignment monitoring. As it turns out, they're a little bit delayed because of the COVID issues. So they have pushed out their deadlines. Right now, once the Fall 2 submission closes, we'll get our data over to them by early May. They anticipate opening up CalSAS in early June. If you have not heard anything about getting credentials to get into CalSAS, your County Office of Education credential analyst is the person you should contact. The CTC has been communicating with those folks already, and some number of them may have already reached out to you all, but that's your point of contact once CalSAS opens up. By early August, basically once the system opens up in early June, you have 60 days to justify any questionable assignments. And then there's another 30 days that your monitoring authority, which is generally your county office, has another 30 days to send final justifications to the commission. Next slide. This year, misassignment data will not be posted on the commission's dashboard. So 1920 being an inconsequential year for assignment monitoring provides really a great opportunity to assess your data quality issues that can be addressed before the next year. So we really, to the extent you can take your Fall 2 submission that's due in a couple weeks, really seriously, it really will help, I think, you identify any issues when the data becomes consequential in 2021. Okay, so data maintenance during this time. So maybe, hopefully we'll answer some of the questions you have. But as I said earlier, you should continue to enroll students, new students and exiting transferring students in your local systems, even during this time when schools physically are closed, and to maintain other CalPADS data, including the program SNF, SPRG, SELA, and SPED files, and to resolve CCEs. Next slide. And during these school site closures, this is posted on our website. LEAs really should continue to communicate with students and families and how they're providing opportunities for learning. So assuming that you're communicating with them, we're hoping that you're getting information in regards to kids transferring and so forth. With regards to special education, the special ed coordinator should really work closely with your CalPADS folks and your enrollment coordinators to ensure that students are properly enrolled. So I don't know, Shiloh, if you wanted to make any comments here.
Yeah, so again, there's some things that we obviously don't know or don't know at this time around updating and amending IEPs. However, if you are having changes in a student's enrollment, so a student is no longer being enrolled in, say, a county program, and now they're enrolled for distance learning at their home district, you shouldn't update those enrollments. There's a lot of reasons we need that. Additionally, if you have students who are in non-public schools who are no longer being served in a non-public school and now they're home being served by their home district, then you should update the enrollments for that. There's a lot of reasons for that, but mainly because we're starting to ask questions about where students are at, how students are learning, how students are being provided distance learning, continuing to, as districts are continuing to collect ADA and using those funds for distance learning, we need to also know how the special education services are being supported, students are being supported in order to access that distance learning. So more questions we ask, the most up-to-date data helps us answer those questions better for the folks who are making the policies and who are providing guidance.
Great. Thanks, Shallow. Okay, so with regards to submitting attendance data, we had this in one of our flashes that we put out recently, but the chronic absenteeism collection in CALPADS leverages the attendance that you all collect for reporting ADA. And our fiscal folks have put out guidance that LEAs don't claim ADA apportionment days. That's when you're closed. So since you're not collecting attendance for ADA purposes, that means you're not collecting attendance for chronic absenteeism purposes or for reporting on the STAS. So you're not, so that's kind of, we're not expecting you basically to be collecting attendance for STAS purposes while your schools are closed. For apportionment purposes, they've put out guidance that ADA will go through February 29th. For STAS purposes, if you were still open after February 29th, you were open, say, until the middle of March and you collected attendance, well, then that should be attendance you would report to CALPADS should we end up collecting that data. You're expected, but basically any days that you're closed, those would be considered days that kids were not expected to attend. So I don't know if that helps with the question, but next slide. We did have this discussion with our student information system vendors on a call recently because you all were having so many questions, and frankly, we were confused about exactly what kind of guidance to give you because your SISs all do things perhaps a little differently. But bottom line is you really need to look to your vendors for guidance on how you maintain your instructional calendars to track students. If you're deciding to track students' participation in distance learning, or if you need to keep that instructional calendar open because you're actually going to be, you still have courses and you're going to give out credits and grades. So that is something you need to talk to your student information system vendor for guidance. But in terms of submitting data to CALPADS for chronic absenteeism, basically follow what you do for ADA purposes, except you can, if you were open past the 29th of February, which is when you are keeping attendance for ADA purposes, you can still submit those attendance days. You would just adjust your expected school days of enrollment to reflect when your school's closed in terms of students coming. So I don't know, Brandy, does that answer the question or not?
So it answered some of the questions, but there's a couple of things. The first thing is that LEAs are asking if they have to go and change all their courses to with the characteristic distance learning.
Yeah, we no, we don't right now. Our guidance is
don't
no.
Say yeah.
What was that?
Don't say yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. No. Yeah. The courses were not, if they were not distance learning when the semester started, they're not distance learning. It's kind of this odd thing that this whole thing happened that they're now having to become distance learning. But no, you do not need to go put the distance learning indicator on all of your courses, unless of course it was distance learning to begin with. Everybody, there's always going to be a big asterisk by the date any data submitted in this year. Everyone will understand that for half of the semester, the course was probably delivered in a different way.
Okay, and so a lot of you are asking the same question, which is, should we be taking attendance past February 29th? And the answer with respect to apportionment purposes, for ADA reporting, the answer is no, right? You're reporting the last full month of attendance up to 2/29. But Paula, the other questions that are being asked are, what if students remain enrolled? How do we track student engagement after 2/29?
That is a local decision. We're not expecting it from a chronic absenteeism or perspective. So it's really up to your LEA as to how you are tracking participation and engagement.
Okay, and then with respect to, should they be exiting students if in fact they're remaining enrolled for distance learning?
No, they're still enrolled, right?
Right. So, and a lot of you are asking about your school calendars and that you've got the school closed. You really need to consult with your student information system vendors, because many of them, based on our conversation we had last week, are really recommending against you modifying your instructional calendar. So really consult with your vendors on the best way to track enrollments past 2/29. Modifications of your instructional calendar could have other implications within the student information system.
Right. I mean, if you think about it, don't think about, we're not going to do anything in terms of collecting data for chronic absenteeism that's going to look bad upon you. Basically, you need to do what you need to do locally for things to work. So even though the schools are physically closed, distance learning and other things are still occurring and students are still enrolled. So if you need to keep your instructional calendar open because kids are still taking classes, they're still learning, they're still, engaged in that manner, you need to keep that instructional calendar, as it was.
And then
that helps, but
any status on the physical fitness test?
Oh, shoot. That was it's posted on our website. Since we don't collect any data on that, I didn't put it in the slide. I believe that's not occurring, but you can check our website for that status.
Okay, and then the last one is there a link for special education information, Q&A, etc.?
Yes, there is. I will find it, and I can either put it into the chat or answer that specific question with it. So I don't know what's the best way, but yes, there is a link. If you go to the CDE website, cde.ca.gov, one of the first links on the website is all sort of our guidance and information we provided around COVID-19. It's one of the very first links. And then there is a whole set of guidance that we provided around special education. And I will, and special education, not just special education, but also all types of other related information. And special education is added on there. So I just wanted to, but I will find the guidance that we provided just around providing support to students with disabilities at this time, and then I will link it both in the chat, which I think is closed now, so probably not helpful, and then also to that question.
Okay, Paula, I think you can.
You can still post, Paula, to the chat. I have it set so you can still post it.
Shiloh can. So, Brandy, there's still a few more open questions before we go into the next year slides. Do you want to peruse that at all, or?
Yeah, we can. So a lot of you continued, your students were attending through March, but remember, for apportionment purposes, there was really specific guidance that basically said for the last session of ADA reporting up to 2/29 is the last set of information that you're submitting for average daily attendance purposes. So how do you track attendance for kids that were attending up until 3/13? So for apportionment purposes, it is not being included for ADA reporting. Paula, maybe this is a question for you. So if they were actually physically attending till 3:13, does that information get included in their expected attendance days for status reporting? Or are we giving a directive that 2/29 is the cutoff date for status reporting as well?
No, I mean, if they were attending through 3/13, then those would be expected school days, assuming that, you know, if you collected attendance through those days.
Okay.
Also, I want to just direct you to, in the flash, we had the direct link to all the COVID-19 FAQs regarding ADA. It's not easily linkable from CD's first website, but if you go to that link, they've got about 12 questions that they respond to regarding ADA specifically and how it's calculated and so forth. So I would direct you there.
And so, and Paula, some of those links to those resources are in this presentation, correct?
Yeah, that particular link is not. It's in the flash that we sent out. I think it's flash 173.
Okay. So our district has been marking all the closed days as emergency closure on our calendars. Do we need to open all those days back up and restore the original calendars? I don't think so, Anita. I think the issue is that you don't want to modify your instructional calendars. So meaning your last day of school was set to be, let's say, hypothetically, May 30th. The vendors are really recommending against you modifying your instructional calendar to end on, March 1st, modifying that instructional calendar. I think that's what we mean. But if you've marked those days as emergency closure on the calendars, I think that's appropriate because you would not expect those days to be expected attendance days for purposes of the stats and even for attendance reporting.
So Brandy, Susan Smith has a question on the J13A about the student engagement participation.
Yeah. Paula, do you know anything about the J13A COVID form? That's a fiscal form.
Right. I don't know any more than what we've posted on our website.
Okay.
On those FAQs.
And then I think Rand Van Dyke was looking for some official document that supports the statement of not taking attendance. Is there an official document?
Well, for ADA purposes, it's all the FAQs respond to that.
Okay.
That you don't need to collect attendance for ADA purposes past 2/29.
And that's in the fiscal guidance, right?
Right. And as our flash stated, we leverage that attendance collection for STAS. So we're not expecting you to do anything more. However, if you did collect attendance through, say, 3/13, that's fine. And if we should collect chronic absenteeism data, you would report that attendance, and your expected days of attendance would include those days.
And so should we be E155ing all students as of the date of their closure if we are not expecting to reopen this year, or should they be E155 in June?
At the end of the school year, which would be June, because there's still, the building is physically closed, but school is still occurring, right?
So Paula, for LEAs that may be continuing or continue to have enrollment and student attending beyond February 29th, do they have an option when it comes to the STAS of choosing ending it on the 29th or when they actually really stop taking attendance at their school for EOY?
I would say that they have that choice because we don't know anyway.
Okay.
Okay. Are we going to cover the graduation requirements that were put out by UCCSU? I can't remember.
No, we don't have a slide on that.
Okay, so how does harmless grading impact course completion files at the end of year? Some districts are moving to a CR or no CR model, a credit or no credit model, where they're not giving traditional grades A through F guidance.
In CALPADS, that translates to if the student no credited, that means no credits earned and a F, a fail, right?
Right. So pass fail.
It's just pass fail and credits earned or not.
Okay. Let's see. So with
Maybe.
respect to, we'll go into some of the suspensions and things like that.
Yeah, we'll
We'll
get
go
into
back.
that later.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I think we got most of them, Brandy.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
think, folks, if we didn't, and you're dying to have us answer that, you may want to, as we get further on in the slides, it may be appropriate to resurface your question. But we think we're going to be able to answer the rest of these as we continue on.
Great.
So back
So-
to,
So we're moving on to some of the key changes for 2021. The next slide. I'm going to talk very little bit about CALPADS and assessments and the changes coming there. 1 year graduation counts, we're moving that from fall 1 to end of year 3. We're actually going to do that a little quicker than we at first were planning. So this coming end of year 3 in the cumulative enrollment report, there's going to be a filter that you can see your 1 year graduates, that you should look at that. If we're still required to submit 1 year grad counts to the federal government, that's the only reason we collect that particular data. That's, again, different from the cohort. It's just the 1 year grad count that there's a federal reporting requirement on. If we're still required to submit that data to the feds, we're going to use the end of year 3 data this year. So you should look at the filter. Next year, we will have a report, so it'll be more clearly identifiable to you. And then starting in 2021, we're going to remove the 1 year certification of the 1 year graduate counts from fall 1. Okay, so that's a change that kind of overlaps this year, but the main change will be next year when you will see the removal of the 1 year grad counts from the fall 1 reports, and you'll see a new end of year 3 1 year grad certification report. Next year also, we will be updating the CTE reports to reflect the new Perkins 5, which right now the approval of the Perkins 5 state plan is in the governor's office, I believe. So once that's all finalized, it gives us the ability to really modify the reports to reflect Perkins 5. If anything, it makes things a little bit more straightforward. And I know you all tend to have a lot of questions about concentrators versus completers, and we can talk about that later on, but just letting you know that that's when we're making all the changes. And also next year, there will be a new work-based learning file in end of year, and we do have a few slides on that, so I'll get to that in a second. So next slide. So CALPADS and assessments, we started off with a whole lot of slides here, but then we removed them because there were too many unknowns, as the department right now is working with a test vendor to kind of make all the changes needed given the whole COVID situation. But we do know 2 changes will be happening next year. We just don't know exactly when. So the first big change will be that when the initial LPAC goes online, then the students' English language acquisition statuses, their ELASs of English learner or IFEP, are going to come directly from the test vendor after the student takes the initial LPAC. That means that LEAs will no longer be able to submit EL or IFEP statuses to CALPADS. It'll come directly from the test vendor. And it's going to cycle through CALPADS, in that once the status is made to say EL, then we will, CALPADS will submit that EL status back through to ETS, who will now know the student is EL, and it makes the student eligible to take the summative LPAC. So that whole cycle will all happen through. But basically, the biggest impact on you all is that you won't be able to submit EL or IFEP statuses anymore. Pretty much, it's just going to be TBD, EO, and RFEP. There'll continue to be the correction codes. In fact, the test vendor will have a couple correction codes themselves if there needs to be a rescoring of the initial LPAC, but we'll provide that detail later. Again, initial LPAC initially was going to go online July 1st. That has been delayed. And so as soon as we know what's going to happen with the initial LPAC coming July 1, we'll let you know. The other big change is the student test settings. That's designated supports and accommodations, which will be submitted through CALPADS and will no longer be submitted directly into the test operations management system, TOMS. Again, we don't know when this will happen. However, we have finalized the file that will be submitted from you all to CALPADS. And we've provided that to the test vendors, to both the student information system and the special ed vendors. So they now have that, and they should be hopefully preparing that and providing you information about how you need to load data into your student information systems. But again, we don't know the timeline on that. We do know that originally it was going to be August, but now it looks like it's going to be pushed back to October or even later. So when we know the timeline of that, we'll provide more details to you all. I think the main thing in terms of getting ready, however, is you need to at least begin to identify where student supports and accommodations are maintained locally. We know that for special ed students, that tends to be in the special ed systems, but for your general ed kids, your kids on 504 plans, and especially your English learners, you need to really identify where those test settings are currently maintained, because you're going to need to start maintaining them in your student information systems. Okay, and then the other, again, so once we know more information, we'll definitely send out a lot of communication about the changes to the testing. There's one change in law that we just wanted to alert you to. Starting July 1, the current law for suspending students in K3 for committing defiance will change from K3 to K5. And suspending students in grades 6 to 8 for committing defiance. That also goes into effect, but only until July 1, 2025, unless it's extended further than that. The law now is more explicit that charter schools are also prohibited from suspending and expelling students for defiance. The existing exception with regards to suspending students for defiance under EC section 4890, we refer often to that as the teacher suspension. That still is in effect. The bottom line, you need to make sure that you're not suspending students K5 and 6-8 for defiance starting July 1. Okay, next slide. I think that's it for 2021 changes. Oh, I lied. I didn't have another slide about the work-based learning. Basically, we will be sending out a flash about work-based learning very soon, but that will be a new file to submit end of year 2021. So that'll be coming.
Paula, before we
Yeah.
go on, we had several questions about the 1-year grad rate. So folks are asking if it's the same thing as the DAS 1-year grad count.
No, it is not. And we will talk more about graduation rates generally, the ones that are used for accountability purposes later on in the presentation. The 1-year grad count is not related to accountability at all. It is simply a federal reporting requirement that you all used to certify during fall, and has always caused a lot of confusion with the cohorts. So that's why we're moving it.
So it's just basically an annual count of graduates rather than graduates that graduated
that are part of a
cohort.
Correct.
It's just an annual count of graduates. Okay.
So we are going to take a break, but do you want to answer some more questions there, Brandy, regarding the LPAC?
Sure, I haven't gotten down that far yet.
Oh,
okay.
We do plan on taking a break before Angela does her presentation, but we want to finish off answering those questions in this last segment before we take that break.
So couple of things. Will we be able to export a file with EL and IFEP student data to upload into our student information system? From CalPADS, yes, you will, right? So the expectation is you will still be able to download the CELA file, and the CELA file will have data in it that indicates whether or not a student is EL or IFEP. The other thing that you should know is that when you enroll students in your districts within CalPADS, their English language acquisition status is actually part of the SSID enrollment extract. So when you pull that out, you should be able to download that when you're enrolling students. Okay, the next question, with the new LPAC going online to transmit English language acquisition records directly to CalPADS, what will happen or how will we fix data when a site tests a student early, but the student ends up being a no-show and doesn't attend that initial school? So does this mean we can no longer ask other LEAs to delete data that is blocking us, etc.? So the answer to that question is that, you know, these results are coming directly from the test vendor to CalPADS. And one thing that you need to understand about these new EL and IFEP records is that nobody owns those records, right? These are test vendor generated English language acquisition statuses. So once that student tests EL or IFEP, then nobody will be able to change that record. The only logical progression for students that are identified as EL is either reclassification, or if a correction is made at the LEA level before the summative test, then they would be able to submit a correction through CalPADS. But EL and IFEP statuses will not be owned by any LEA anymore. They're directly attached to the student. Okay, what about accommodations for non-SPED students such as 504? Question answered, but what is the name of the file you talked about? What is the name of the file? So for non-SPED students, 504 plans, those test settings, the STSE file, the student test settings file, would be submitted for students on 504 accommodation plans. So any of those test settings would be submitted for 504 students, but the difference is that they're actually submitted from the student information system rather than from the special education data system.
And we have a flash pretty much ready to go that goes through all those details. We were just asked to not talk too much about it in the sim just because they're still deciding some things, but we'll definitely be providing a lot more detailed information sooner than later on all of that.
Right. So our test settings not going to go through the SPED reporting system? Yes, they are. They're going to go. So remember, it's dependent on the type of student, right? If they're a student with disabilities, the expectation is all test settings would be sent to CalPADS in the new test settings file from your special education vendors. If you have students that are on 504 accommodation plans, solely 504 accommodation plans, or students that are solely English learners, meaning they're not also students with disabilities, then those test settings would come up from the student information system. How will we obtain student English language acquisition status? Will it all come from CalPADS? Yes, that's the answer to the question, particularly when they're initially being assessed. So any statuses, any initial statuses of English learner or initially fluent English proficient will come directly from CalPADS. The only statuses that LEAs will submit are the TBD status, an English only status, and RFEP status. Every other status will come directly from CalPADS. Okay, how should we handle any suspensions that were due to occur on days that we have now been closed for COVID-19? Are we going to get errors for those in end of year if they're reported as suspended or non-school days?
So we can probably talk about that when we get to the suspension stuff.
Okay. Let's see. How will TBD status impact reports etc., since we can't test until we return to school.
Isn't that 90-day window that you're supposed to test them within 90 days? And we have an IVR on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we probably might need to look at a few of those kinds of IVRs.
Validations, yeah, and adjust based on our reality.
Right. Will there be a 1-year cohort report available for DAS schools in CalPADS?
No,
No.
So sorry, we
not
do
this
have
year.
yeah, but we do have some recommendations for how you can potentially confirm what your 1-year rate. We have some recommendations for that.
And those are there's some slides I think on that later.
Okay. Do we submit teacher suspensions to CalPADS as suspensions if they were referred to the administrator?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. When will a DAS grad rate report be available? Are there plans for this?
There's plans, but we don't know, huh?
Right. I mean, it's right. It's it's a matter of prioritization. The other issue we're having is just the fact that it's changing every year, and it's a little hard to keep up. But yeah, that would be a goal, is to have that in the 5-year report in CalPADS. But right now we do not.
Okay. Let's see. All right. So know that English language acquisition status is not going to be part of the student enrollment file upload. It is not. What I did say was when you're newly enrolling students and you're downloading the SSID enrollment extract from CalPADS, to assist LEAs in determining whether or not they actually had to be tested with the initial LPAC, we actually added the English language acquisition status as an element on that extract to give you an idea about whether or not you actually had to test the student. And that comes in that extract. It's not being collected there. It's just a piece of information that we give you about students that you're newly enrolling. Okay. Let's see. If no one will own an English language acquisition status record, does this mean that we no longer have to worry about cleaning up old data where there are multiple records, or our record precedes another LEA and is the incorrect status? Yeah, for students that are newly tested, you should not have this issue, right? Because you're not relying on an LEA to submit that student's initial status. The initial status is generated by the local scoring tool in TOMS, or actually not even the local scoring tool because it's going online. So the scores will automatically generate an EL or IFEP status. So no, you would not have to clean up any data because no one will own that record. It's actually system generated.
It'll be the factual truth of what occurred for the student, right?
Right, exactly. Okay, so just to confirm, we can mark the rest of the school year as emergency closure, but changing the end date is not recommended. Changing the end date of the school year is not recommended. Talk to, and I can't reiterate enough that you really need to talk to your specific student information system vendors about whether or not you should modify your instructional calendar. If you don't do that, how do you identify the days that your emergency school closure was in effect? You need to really talk to your vendors. They've all got guidance specifically for this.
So Brandy Shiloh would like to answer the question, how will designated supports for non-special ed students be submitted? Are you there, Shiloh?
I'm here. I think it's not that I think we already answered that question.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
And that would be the test file that we just talked about, STSE.
Right. And again, I guess I should have left some of the slides in, but basically you're either submitting the student test setting file. It's coming from your special ed system for special ed students directly to CalPADS through API, or through your student information system for designated supports for general ed kids, kids on 504 plans, and English learners. So that will come from CalPAD, your student information system, to CalPAD. So there's two ways of getting student test settings into CalPADS depending on the student.
Okay, so with the new test settings file, does that mean we'll no longer be able to enter accommodations and designated supports directly into TOMS? So once we move to this new file format, which is expected to go live in October, right, Paula?
That's tentatively, but it has not been confirmed.
Tentatively. So once we move to this new file format, the answer is no, you will no longer be able to log into TOMS and modify accommodations and designated supports. They will have to be updated in your special education data system or your student information system, and they will have to flow through CalPADS.
So the main business process change that we're emphasizing is that you need to identify designated supports and accommodations well in advance of taking tests, so that you've got it in the system and it's all there for when the student is going to sit down and take tests. They are talking about for just the initial LPAC only, potentially the ability for the test administrator to do something directly into the interface of the testing system, but only for the initial LPAC. But otherwise, pretty much all the other things have to come through CalPADS. So you just need to have all that in your different local systems, because we will be pulling that data from CalPADS on a nightly basis and sending it over to the test vendor.
So I would like to suggest that we break right now. We'll look over the Q&As to see if there's anything else pending before we move on. So come back at 10:36 and we'll resume with Angela, and then we'll continue on and get through the slide deck. Does that sound good?
Yes.
All right, break. We're going on mute until 10:36. Okay, folks, we should all be returning to our headphones or computers, and we are gonna resume. We are on slide 28. And I gotta see, Angela's got to get herself on mute. So
I'm here, Martha.
Okay, all right. I'm
ready to
handing
jump
it
in?
off. Yep.
All right, you're still driving though, right?
Yep, still driving.
Right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here with us today. So just to echo what Paula said at the start of the call, what I'm presenting today operates on the assumption that the end of year submission goes forward as normal with no interruptions. So for the next hour and a half or so, I'd like you to join me in imagining that the world is not bananas and pajamas and pants crazy right now. So I'm going to be covering high-level changes for end of year 1, 3, and 4, and then a couple end of year just general reminders that on tickets that we get for from the service desk. Shiloh from CDE SPED office is going to be covering a lot with me for the new end of year 4 submission as well.
And I'd like to add, this is Martha Angela, that we are going to take another break after Angela's done, I think after slide 59. So just throw that in there.
Okay, so you'll notice on the agenda that end of year 2 isn't even listed, and that's because there's just so few changes. We're not even going to talk about it. Brandy has several slides that she's going to go over that she typically presents at her road shows. She hasn't been able to visit all counties, and so this is an opportunity for all the LEAs to hear her presentation. And then finally, I'm going to round out my presentation with a few tips on engaging with the service desk. And I just want to emphasize that this is not a substitute for training. This is just a high-level presentation, and we do encourage you to still go to training. We have both advanced and general. Next slide.
If I could get my pointer on the right page.
This one has some animation on it too, so you can just go ahead and click through them. So I saw some questions in the Q&A. Hopefully this answers some for you. It's a little confusing. So we have kind of a blend of things going on now with the various submissions. So end of year 1 and 2 are like fall 2. They only have one level of approval, and that's LEA approved. Your SELPA is not involved in end of year 1 or 2. End of year 3 and 4 have 2 levels of approval. That's similar to what you did for fall 1, LEA approved and SELPA approved. For end of year 3, SELPAs have 3 reports that are related to students with disabilities that they have to certify. And then for end of year 4, the SELPA is certifying all. So it's first the LEA approval, then the SELPA approval for SELPA for EOI 4.
And Angela has added notes to her slides. So if you printed it out with the notes, you would see that detail.
All right, so end of year 1, real quick, just a couple of things that we want to talk about. Go ahead and jump to the next slide, Martha. It's a little repetitive. So we're just going to go over the highlights and changes. There is a new data element on the student course completion record this year. It's not in CALPADS right now, but it will be after fall 2 closes. So make sure you're working with your vendor on your file format because there is a new data element in that record, and it is the Carnegie unit. We'll drill down and talk about that next on the next slide. So fall 2 reports, changes that you saw for the new course and course section attributes, those are also translated into the end of year 1 course report. So not a big change, not an unexpected change anyway. And then there's new college credit courses and attributes that are important for the career college indicator that we'll go over. So Carnegie unit, the migrant office over at CDE has to report all secondary migrant student course history information to the federal office of migrant education. And one of those fields is called credits granted or Carnegie units. And the definition is up there for you, proposed definition, excuse me. Most districts will have 10 credits for a full year course, which translates to 1 Carnegie unit. So starting on end of year 1 this year, you're going to see this data element on your 3.11 report, which is your course sections completed. And you'll also see it in online maintenance and also when you extract the SCSC record from the ODS extracts. All right, so back to identifying college credit courses in CALPADS. For the College Career Indicator, the CCI, on the California School Dashboard, one of the big changes is the data source for college credit courses. So starting this year, there's 10 new academic course codes that map to academic college credit courses, and those are those listed there. And then we have a slide later on that will show you how to verify those on your reports. Career Tech Ed CTE courses that earn college credit will count towards the CCI on the dashboard as long as the student is a CTE completer and the student meets one additional measure on the CCI to be counted as prepared. And we just wanted to point out these two new codes. Previously, it was one code 16 for I should back up a little bit. So your CTE college courses the codes are in the 7,000 through 8,999 range. And if they have an attribute for the instructional level code of 23 or 24, so college credit or dual credit. So this slide was repurposed from another presentation, and when I was reviewing slides last night, I noticed the screenshot doesn't match the language in the box or header, but I think just generally the intent of the slide is to remind you that CCI measures such as leadership, military science course, CTE, and college credit can be verified in CALPADS using your 3.10 report and the filters on there. And I think Brandy has another slide on this later in the presentation that she'll go through.
Right.
Okay, end of year 3, homeless data and disciplinary structure. Let's jump to the next slide, Martha. Certification of homeless counts is moving from end of year 2 to end of year 3. And what was formerly the discipline file has been split out into 3 new files. The strike through bullet item, we had published this PowerPoint yesterday afternoon, and somebody on the listserv was pointing out, I think it was Doug from Hanford, that a lot of moving parts in getting this PowerPoint up, and he was absolutely right. Things are changing rapidly in the state, as you can imagine, and so that statement is not true. Shiloh's got a correction for it. Yeah, she's got the accurate statement in one of her slides coming up. So, and then CALPADS are going to need access to some end of year 3 reports. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then go back one more, Martha. What we're missing there is the 1-year grad count. So that's another big change, that moving that to end of year 3. And again, Brandy's got a slide to go over that. Okay, we talked about that. The 5.4 and 5.5 are the homeless reports that you're currently used to seeing in end of year 2. Those are now in end of year 3. And that's because the cumulative enrollment count is in end of year 3, which is a key factor when we are talking about the homeless subgroup as part of the data quest and the dashboard accountability metrics. What was happening is LEAs were certifying end of year 2, and then maybe sometime later end of year 3, or vice versa, and the data could get out of sync. And so moving those two together, we keep that homeless subgroup in alignment with chronic absenteeism, suspension, and cumulative enrollment. So as a reminder, can you go back, Martha? I do want to really emphasize identifying your homeless is really important. The Department of Ed found that there was a huge decline in the number of homeless students reported in Fall 1. I think it was a little over 6%, or 13,000 students from last year's Fall 1 to this year's Fall 1. And so that it's really important that you identify a student as homeless at any point in the academic year, and then also reconfirming that status at both at the beginning and at the end of the school year. All right, so back in January, we sent out a flash notifying you that the student discipline file was going to be retired and that the user interface in CALPADS is going to be disabled. And that happened on February 25th. So what that means to you in CALPADS as a user, you won't be able to update any historical student discipline information through batch or online. You won't be able to view student or incident detail in online maintenance. You won't be able to access the operational data store, the ODS versions of the discipline reports. What you will have access to, though, and this is important, is your certified historical reports of your discipline reports. Those will still be available to you. Okay, we're going to drill down a little bit, get some detail on the discipline restructure. And then this is just a slide on the background of it. If we want to collect the behavioral restraints and seclusions, and those may not be the result of an offense. So it's not really a discipline anymore, it's an incident.
You want me to go forward?
I think we talk more about restraints and seclusions, or maybe do you want me to talk about that now? So the behavioral restraint has two components, mechanical and physical, and then the other one is seclusion. And I'm going to talk more about that, Martha. You can keep going. In the notes of this PowerPoint presentation, there are reference materials to the assembly bill that was the driver behind these changes. So you can, if you're curious about where these changes are coming from, you can drill down on that. And I guess the point on that slide is that's really important to drive home is that these changes apply to both special students with disabilities and general ed population. Okay, so you have some new acronyms to learn while you're on your home arrest. So SINC, SOF, and SIRS are your new acronyms. So the first one is the student incident, and that's SINC. And you're going to be reporting any incident that has results in a physical restraint, mechanical restraint, or seclusion. Or in which a statutory offense was committed. And so I guess one of the points we wanted to drive home on this one is that an incident with restraints and seclusion can occur without a statutory offense being committed. And report all incidents that where a statutory offense was committed. And the key point to this is that the student incident record is the parent record. So in the terms of sequencing, when you're uploading files, you'll want to upload SINC first and make sure it's posted before you do the next two files. Kind of think of it as the relationship between the staff demographic and the staff assignment, how the staff demographic is the parent and the staff assignment is the child. All right, your next acronym, SIRS. Student incident results. This is a many-to-one relationship to the SINC. So every SINC is going to have at least one SIR, but potentially could have multiple SIRs. So you could have, for instance, an incident that resulted in a suspension, but also maybe a seclusion. So there potentially could be multiple records that have associated to one SINC. One other thing I wanted to mention on that slide is the code set for disciplinary action category code was renamed, and the new table name is student incident result. And there are some new codes associated to this code set, and we have those listed for you on an upcoming slide. Okay, last new acronym, SOF, student offense file. So SINC, SIRS, and SOF. This is the last file associated with these changes, and this file captures the student offense code for incidents where the statutory offense was committed. And you're going to be reporting all offenses, regardless of whether the incident resulted in a suspension or expulsion. So if there wasn't a statutory offense committed, whatever happened as a result of that, you're still going to report it. There weren't any changes to the student offense code set. And just a reminder that students can only be suspended or expelled for statutory offenses. Okay, so the first three codes there are the old codes. The rest in red are the new. Give you a second to just kind of scan through those. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we retired some discipline reports. So 7.1 through 7.9 are gone, and they're replaced by 7.10 through 7.18 for the academic year 2019-2020 going forward. And just to go through this table real quick for you, so we've got the report number, the name / description of it, report type. What I want to call out is what those acronyms are there. SN means snapshot. CA is the county authorizing report. So if you're a school district that has independently reporting charters, that's where you would go to find your incident counts for those after they've been certified. And then the last column is whether or not the CELPA must approve, yes or no. So CELPA approval is required for 16, 17, and 18, the last three reports on that table. And just a quick timeline on the availability of these reports, because we are still in the process of developing and testing. The LEA reports will be available at the start of end of year submission on May 11th. CELPA reports are going to be a little bit delayed. They will be available end of June. And that's probably okay, because if we're, gives you guys time to upload the data. And then the county authorizing reports will be available in mid-July. And we are not going to have ODS reports this year. They are targeted for next year. And then another comment on these reports is the roles that you will need. There's a new role called sync. But if you previously had the Estes role for accessing these reports, it just rolled over into the sync. So you don't need to do anything, or if you're the LEA admin and any users you support already had the Estes, you won't need to do anything, and they'll automatically be assigned the sync. You also need the end of year 3 reports role to access this.
So Angela, this is Martha. One of the things that we wanted to also point out to our LEA admins is that you notice the asterisk on the first two reports, 7.10 and 7.11, that we are encouraging the LEAs to give access to your CELPAs to EOY3 report roles, because they need to see the data that's on report 7.10 and 7.11. That data has a combination of general ed students as well as special ed students on it. And so we couldn't make it just a CELPA report. So it's important that the LEA admins make sure that your CELPAs do have the LEA EOY3 report role.
Yeah, Martha, thank you. I think Shiloh wanted to say a little bit too about that disproportionality and on this slide and the next slide.
Yeah, so this data is one of the key elements that were used in identifying districts for and LEAs for disproportionality and significant disproportionality. As I said in the beginning of the webinar, the requirements around IDA have not been waived, including those around disproportionality and significant disproportionality. So we need to continue to collect this data. I know that there were some questions about how much, when do we consider the times for behavior and information. I'm going to get to that in a moment, but I kind of just wanted to highlight that we use this data for a variety of reasons. And so ensuring that it's accurate and it's submitted, and that your CELPA has the ability to review it, because they are considered the entity submitting data for students with disabilities in California, and that's a requirement in law, is really important. The best way to do that is to provide CELPAs the reports role so that they can see that in the process, and to ensure that the data is really accurate, to help you in the end have accurate data reporting to us that we're going to use for monitoring and enforcement. Is there another slide after this? I think the questions.
There
okay,
you
so there were
go.
some questions. that folks were having. I see people are already asking these questions. So how can LEAs submit the incident data for end of year 3, including suspensions, expulsions, and new data regarding restraint exclusions when schools are closed or have moved to distance learning? So there's no change in the statutory requirement to collect restraint and seclusion. So districts still need to ensure that they're collecting that data. So what we are advising at this time is that LEAs submit in end of year all incidents that occurred during the school year through June 2020, including any incidents that occur subsequent to the LEA transitioning to distance learning. So I think that is really important. If the district is closed, obviously they're not going to be able to be reporting those. I joke all the time. I have my 2 children here home with me, and I would love to suspend them every day. Obviously, that's not an option, but you should be identifying instances. There's still students who are on home hospital, who are in non-public schools, and things like that, who may be they may still be having some sort of level of learning associated with their program. And so you'll want to make sure that you're tracking that level of information. I'll talk about non-public schools in a moment. But if there is instances where students are attending a program and there's restraints, seclusions, and or suspensions and expulsions occurring, you'll need to report that. However, if the district is fully distance learning and there are no students in any programs, then you would only provide the data up until the student, up until the school was still in session. Also, I just kind of want to note, if for some reason, this becomes a situation where we can all go back to normal, which hopefully we will soon, and school comes back into session, or students go back to a non-public school, or they go back into a program for a school day, before June 30th, and any incidents that occurred during that time, then those need to be reported. So a lot of this is about what is your individual situation in your LEA that requires the level of reporting. The important thing is, though, it does not mean you don't report for the entire year. You definitely report all incidences that occur between July 1 and until the day schools students were no longer physically at school. So that's kind of important. Then there are some questions around non-public schools, and I also saw that kind of happened in home hospital as well. So what are the expectations about that? So you are required to submit incident data that has occurred at non-public schools up until students are still attending that school. So if they're still attending that school, they should be reporting those incidents that occur. So just continuing to keep that in mind. And we're talking about schools, not any residential facility associated with. That's sort of a separate element. We're talking about if they're still going to that school, so the school is still operational, then they should be continuing to report those to you, and you should be recording them. But all of the incidences that occurred while a student attended that school for the earlier part of this school year should be reported. And so you'll need to work with your non-public schools. We've done a number of webinars around that, about how to collect and report that data. But it's really on the LEA to make sure the students they have placed in non-public schools have their data accurately reported for suspension, expulsion, restraint, and seclusion.
And Shiloh, in the notes there, I added the link to the MPS training that you, Brandy, and Nate did. So folks, take a look at the notes and you'll get the link for the MPS training for data population.
Shiloh, we're getting a few questions that people are kind of confused about the CELPA level roles and how they assign those roles. And it's not CELPA level roles, but for CELPA level users.
Okay, Brandy, did you want to go through that?
Yeah, so just wanted to reiterate, there are certain reports in your LEAs that your CELPAs will not be able to see just logging in with their CELPA level user org, right? Their org type. So there are several reports that include data for not only students with disabilities, but also your general ed populations. For disproportionality, they have to be able to look at those reports. And the only way right now this year that they're going to be able to look at those reports is if you assign that specific user to your organization at the LEA level and provide them the report roles for end of year 3. That's the only way they're going to be able to look at it. So you don't have to create SELPA level accounts. In fact, you can't create SELPA level accounts, but you can take a user that is a SELPA level user and add them to your organization at an LEA level and give them the EOY3 report rule so that they can look at those specific reports because they need them for disproportionality.
And Brandy, this is Martha. It can be tricky if you're not familiar with the LEA admin functionality in CalPADS. And there is a recording in the CSIS YouTube playlist that shows you how, as an LEA admin, how you can use the LEA admin feature and add org type to an account and give them that role, or send in a service ticket, and we'll walk you guys through it.
So I see some questions that are coming in. I'm just going to try and go through them. Hi, Kevin. How are you doing? Do we need to report incidences that don't result in suspension, expulsion, and other means of correction? So that's an excellent question. Yes, we do need to answer all, or we do need to ask all questions, or I'm sorry, we do need to input all incidences that have other means of correction. Well, I saw a couple questions here. They seem to have disappeared. So somebody was asking about CalPADS. Should we disregard pre-entered suspensions or expulsions, or should we remove them? So for example, on March 10th, a student received like a 10-day suspension, and then the school closed on March 15th. Brandy, should we go back and sort of look and see what the requirements are going to be around that?
Yeah, that's why I hadn't answered it, was because that's a good question. I mean, if the student actually never got to serve their suspension because the entire school closed, they didn't really technically miss instruction. So I think that's something we have to talk about. Paula, if you're still on, that's probably something that we need to address if we want them to actually submit those suspensions where they actually never served their suspension.
Yeah, we were going to go and review all the IVRs and CVRs to see what any impacts.
So somebody was asking about suspensions or discipline incidences that occurred during distance learning.
If it aligns to the 48900 or 48915 ed code violations, I mean, that's one of the really important things is, you know, a student can technically be suspended from distance learning, right? And so if they're violating an ed code, and if a school is making that decision, my assumption is that they would be able to report that, correct, Paula?
Yeah, but those are some of the little.
You're muffled. We can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, some of those we'll provide more clarity, more guidance on. We just need to think about it a little more and look at the IVRs and CVRs, and then it will depend on what we require in terms of submission.
So we'll more guidance is forthcoming. So just stay tuned.
Because help us know.
Will NPS have training for this new behavior data? And so I will. And I think you're right. So hold on a second. So there's stuff happening here in the Q&A, which is making it very confusing. Will NPS have training for this new behavior data? They have had training. We have done a number of trainings. And we may continue to do trainings. It sort of depends on how things work out here. There's a lot of things happening. But Martha did link the training that we have done with NPSs below. So they have had training. So I think somebody said, hey, I think what's happening is they're sorting the questions by the number of thumbs ups that are happening. So maybe don't thumbs up questions. Like if you maybe just, think about thumbing up because it's kind of hard for us to look at these questions because we keep bopping up and down because people are thumbing them up. So no, maybe don't thumb up. So the NPS training link is in the PowerPoint that was downloaded. So I thought in order to add a user to our LEA, users need to have an email account from our LEA. So how can we add CALPA users to our LEA?
So remember, you're adding a person. You're not adding a CELPA level person. I mean, they do work for the CELPA, but remember, a user has an email that is attached to several different types of organizations. One of those organization types could be CELPA, but another one that user could have is an LEA level user. So you're not creating CELPA level accounts for them. You're creating an LEA level account for a person that works in your CELPA so they can see those reports in your district. Right now, those reports are not visible to those individuals just using their CELPA level org type in CALPADS. So we're asking you to assist in creating those LEA level accounts for them within your districts.
You're making an association and you're kind of giving them privilege to have access to the EOI reports role by doing this. The account already exists, so you're not creating it. You're just adding a role to their existing account. It happens to be an LEA role called EOI 3 report.
And if you are an online or virtual school and you don't have any incidents to report, you wouldn't have to submit the sync soft or SIRS files, right? If you don't have any incidents because kids are not actually physically at any sort of location. So, you will get a warning upon certification saying, hey, are you sure you don't have any incidents to report? You will still have to certify the reports that basically say you're certifying 0 incidents. Can we give the CELPA a new user agreement before we give them access?
It's a local.
Yeah, that's your local policy, you can do that.
So somebody was asking, what support is available for NPS sites in ensuring they understand and comply with reporting? So we provided a number of webinars for non-public schools. Again, that's linked inside the PowerPoint notes. But again, it's very important that folks understand these are actually your students in your LEA who are being placed in a non-public school site. And so it's important that you work with the non-public school to make sure incidences and information about your students are being reported to you accurately. And so if you have situations where there's concerns or there's questions, please put in a help ticket. We can provide you support. But again, this is sort of the responsibility of the LEA because these students are your students. They're not, you'll put them onto a bus and send them to an NPS and then they become someone else's. They're still the responsibility of the student, of the LEA.
And so what's being said here is they need to have that relationship with the NPS and establish practices to be sure that they're collecting this information so that you can report it, because they can't report it into CALPADS unless you teach them how to use CALPADS. So the training goes into that.
Yeah, and you have a master contract with that non-public school. You wouldn't be able to place them in a non-public school without a master contract agreement. So I would make sure that that includes all the information that you need to work with them to make sure you're getting the data. But again, it is your students.
So we've got a couple questions about the validations that occur between the incident files and the STAS file, the student attendance or student absence summary. So I just wanted to reiterate that the only time you're going to get a certification validation, a fatal certification validation, validating those 2 file types is when you've reported a student as absent due to suspension for at least 1 full day, but you have not reported a discipline record for them. Okay, the validation does not work in the reverse order, meaning if I reported a student as suspended in the incident or the student incident result file, but I don't have absent due to a day of suspension in the STAS file. We don't have the validation going that way. It only goes in the reverse direction. So if you've said a student has been absent at least one full day due to suspension. You must have student incident results and a student offense file. Okay. So CELPA will have to access each district separately. For those reports that include general education students and students with disabilities, the answer is yes. So for the NPS training, were they given instructions, what, when, and the format of the data to give? So the link to the training is in this PowerPoint, folks. Take a look at what we told them. It's almost the exact same training that you guys get for end of year 3. We did talk about all of this stuff during that training. And additionally, there are some local advocacy groups that have been providing assistance to specific NPS sites too. So, you know, if you're having issues with specific NPS sites, please submit a service ticket.
So it is almost 11:15, and so I would like to suggest we continue on. And Shiloh, you can speak to EOI 4 as well. You guys all good with that? And if there's any questions as we go along that are really important to answer, we can do so. All good?
Okay, so we're still in the continue. So this is the continuing.
Yeah, these are my slides, Shiloh. Just a couple of them, and then I'll hand it back to you. Okay. All right, so we have a brand new submission. This is end of year 4. It is exclusively for students with disabilities. And this is our final rollout of rolling CASEMIS into CALPADS. The end of year 4 dates are the same as the end of year 1 through 3 dates. And what's included in end of year 4 is the SPED and SSRV records for all students with disabilities who have been referred and have parental consent anytime in this school year. And then the post-secondary status records for all students with disabilities who exited secondary education in the prior year. So for this year, end of year 1920, we're reporting the post-secondary outcomes for students with disabilities who exited secondary education in 2018-2019. And like Fall 1, end of year 4 first has to be approved by the LEA and then by the CELPA. And so what I'd like you to think about now is, how did that go for you in Fall 1? Were there any hiccups or problems that you encountered? And is now a good time to kind of address those so that you're more prepared to do those handoffs between the LEA and the CELPA? And then the DSEA extract. This is a new thing. It's a kind of phase 1 of providing a District of Special Education accountability report to you. Right now, this year, it'll be available as an extract. Next year, it'll be available as a report. And it'll show both the students that your LEA is gaining for accountability purposes, and then also the students you are losing for accountability purposes. Next slide. Okay, so July 1 through June 30 are the dates, and then there's the 3 file types that are the part of end of year 4, special ed, which is SPED, student services, SSRV, and post-secondary status, PSTS. And the assumption is that you've been keeping your enrollment records up to date in CALPADS throughout the year, but if not, you need to make sure you have enrollment current in CALPADS before you can upload these files for your students with disabilities. Now, PSTS is interesting. I think this is the first file type of this kind that we've had where it's a crossover of the student special ed data system and a student information system. So the SEDS and the SIS both are going to be producing this file. When it comes from the SEDS, it goes through the API, and there's not a batch upload process. But what's interesting is that the PSTS, regardless of where it comes, it automatically posts. So just something to keep in mind. All the special ed files do that, but this one's kind of a hybrid. And then last thing with the PSTS that I wanted to mention is that there will be an ODS extract associated with that file type as well. Okay, new reports for end of year 4. Some of these are going to be familiar with you. For you, you saw them in fall 1. So the ed plan by disability and federal setting, and then the student list that goes with those two. And then student services, you got a sneak peek at in fall 1. We ended up reining that requirement back in so that you didn't have to certify student services in fall 1, but the expectation is that they will be included for end of year 4. Okay, and the last 2 reports on this list are brand new, and they're specific to the post-secondary status for the students with disabilities. And now, Shiloh, I think this is you taking over from here.
Okay, so what is different here than say fall 1? Somebody was asking the other day, like, oh, so somebody was asking in the chat, should we? So the SELP is responsible for end of year 4. And depending on sort of how you're structured, some LEAs work with their SELPA to help them submit some of the special education data. So it really depends a little bit how you're structured, but typically for most LEAs, it starts with the LEA just like it was in fall 1. So you submit your special education records through your electronic IEP systems through CALPADS, and then there's the validation errors and the certification errors that would occur. So the EOY 4 reporting window is July 1 to June 30th. And so a couple of things that are different is that we're requiring the submission and certification of the services file for end of year 4. In fall 1, we removed that requirement because we wanted folks to just really get the students the special education records in. And so we really, we said you could submit service records, but we weren't going to make it a certification. We are making a certification for end of year 4, just for a number of reasons. And then we're also requiring, we also have the post-secondary status file, which will be required submission and certification. So you go on to the next slide. So LEAs should submit post-secondary status records for students with disabilities with an education plan type of 100, that's IEP, who exited secondary education the prior year. So these are students who exited in 1819, and you're reporting on them in 1920. You do not report about students who returned to regular education in 1819, transferred to another program, or who passed away. And it's for the end of year cycle reporting only. So it's a little bit different. I think some people are asking, what's the difference between this and fall 2? The folks in special education have been reporting this data for the better part of 10 years. And so this is not a new element that's being reported. They know which students are required to be reported, which ones are not. And so if you're unsure about the students being reported for this, you should work with them because the data is actually going to come from the electronic IEP system to make sure they typically understand who's required to be reported, which students that they're following up on. Next slide. Oh, did I go one too far? No? Okay. So you should be submitting for any student who exited the high school program with a high school completion, with a school completion status of graduated, certification of completion, adult high school diploma, high school equivalency certificate, the CHESP, and completed grade 12 without completing graduation requirements. You will also have students who had the special education exits of prior completion. Oh, I'm sorry, this is not special education reasons, but prior completion of special education, not known enrollment or truant, expelled, no known enrollment, other known medical reasons, and transferred to college. So you'll still follow up on those students as well. So again, this is not something you're doing in terms of your CALPADS coordinators. This is something your special education department, so my folks who are listening, this is something you all do, and you report it within your electronic IEP system and submit it to us. It is something you have done for many years, and so it is not a new requirement or element. It's now just something that's being reported within CALPADS. It used to be called Table D, for those of you who didn't remember that. So remember that part. Okay, and then So, so I'm going to go into some questions that folks have had, and I've seen them sort of pop up on here. So, and I wanted to go through them, and then hopefully if there's other questions, keep in mind, there's some questions we can't answer because we don't know. We don't have a waiver from IDEA, or things are just really new, and so things are adjusting. So I would continue to watch out. I'm not going to be answering many programmatic questions like, should we hold IEPs? Should we provide services? Should we do this? We provided some of that guidance. We will continue to provide guidance from the department, but in terms of the programmatic piece, we're not going to probably be going too far into that. But some people will say, if an LEA is unable to complete timely assessments and IEPs while school sites are closed, or when school is not in session, should LEAs report those late assessments and IEPs to CDE? Yes, you should report them. And there are delay codes that you can use at this time, and I've listed them here. For Part B, initial evaluations, if the parent wasn't available because the parent didn't make the child available even though the LEA was open for distance learning, you could use the delay code of 20. If the LEA was closed due to COVID-19, you can use the code 60. Part C, initial evaluations, there was a delay if the child wasn't made available again, then I use the code 20. If it's a closure due to COVID-19, you can use code 60 or 75. And the same thing for annual review or individual service plan meetings and triennials. So I kind of just wanted to put that out there, but I want folks to really continue to be checking the CDE website as we continue to provide guidance about amendments to IEPs, if they're required, how do we change information when things change for students, how do we hold IEPs, but there's never going to be a time where CDE tells you don't hold IEPs. So if it's within the ability for your district to do that, you should be holding IEPs. You should be working with parents. You should be helping them. But the focus that folks should have right now is not, to me, it's not, do we hold an IEP on the 365th day? The focus for districts should be supporting families and children with disabilities. And so how do you do that? How do you support families so that they understand what's going on, so that they can help their children, if their children are at home, if they're struggling? And then how do we work with them to support them? And that has been a big message that's come out from CDE, is that's the focus. And then we can work around the reporting requirements. So if you can go to the next slide. There we go. So somebody asked earlier, and I said I would answer it. Will CDE continue to monitor LEAs under the data identified non-compliance timelines? Will CDE pull an additional set of records May 15th? This is a question folks have been asking. So we're going to suspend the DING process for the 2019-20 year, and this will be coming out in a larger guidance coming out from the department, hopefully this week. But I kind of wanted to preview it for you all. And while we will not be pulling a subsequent set of records this year, for the rest of this year, that does not mean the requirement to hold timely assessments and IEPs is not in place. You should still hold timely IEPs and assessments, and that there are enforcement requirements if districts are refusing to do that. So, we've already provided you a list of students who did not have timely IEPs as of fall 1, or we provided them to SELPA. So your SELPA should be working with you to help you move through this process. And then again, here's the Code of Federal Regulations that's still required. We cannot waive these requirements. They are not waived. Next slide.
I think that's it, Shiloh.
That's it?
Yeah.
Oh, so we had some questions though, Shiloh.
Okay.
Why does Part B initial evaluations only allow delay code 60, but Part C allows both 60 and 75?
I think that there is a validation that we saw around 75 for Part B, but it doesn't really matter. One of them is school emergency and one of them is school closure. It doesn't matter to me which one you choose, either in for Part C or for IEPs, but it's not one you can use forever. So you should be thinking about how, when things go back to more normal, are we going to start clearing out these elements. And so that's something to consider.
Are you just going to read through them?
I'm sorry.
Were you just going to go ahead and read through them?
Yeah, I can just go and read through them.
Okay.
I think someone was responding to Linda specifically. So I'm not sure what the initial question was. LEAs and ourselves have been using code 60. Do they need to change to 20 if the school is closed and providing distance learning? No, you don't need to change it right now, but if you have a code in place, it's still effective, it's fine. We're not gonna be like, you should have used 20 versus 60. That will provide a delay. Again, it doesn't alleviate the requirements to provide assessments, to provide IEPs. If parents are coming in and saying, I need to have my child assessed, we need to have this needs to happen, LEAs should be working with their parents to make that happen. And that is part of that guidance that we provided. I provided a link to, and I'm happy to provide again here in a minute. So do IEPs need to be amended in order to reflect distance learning? We won't be able to answer that right now. There will be guidance coming out around that shortly. But as you know, we want to make sure we have consistent guidance across the entire sort of range of areas. So a lot of people have to look at our guidance. And so we're working through that process to make sure that we are putting out guidance that's going to be in line with all the requirements in law. I'm not sure how you can do assessments if you're under physical distancing. Again, that might come out in our guidance, but there are options. There are LEAs who are continuing to do IEPs. If you haven't had the opportunity, every Thursday afternoon, the CDE is providing an innovations in special education webinar that walks through other LEAs who are doing innovations around special education, providing distance learning for their children and students with disabilities. It was a really good webinar last week and walked through a couple of like 5 different LEAs who are continuing to provide special education services even during this physical distancing and remote learning time. So I would suggest you look at that.
Shiloh, Judy wants to know about, if it's okay that they're administering the post-secondary survey via phone calls rather than.
Yes, you can do it however you want to do it, Judy. In fact, we've never required you to do it via paper. It is something you can do in any manner that you find is appropriate. In fact, many people use they'll do social media assessments, they'll do all kinds of things to help track their students. So you can do it any way that's best for you. Do we have to put a code in the last annual triennial that occurred since a new transaction will not be created until we're able to have a meeting? If the IEP is late now, that's a consideration you may want to make. That's probably more of a local decision on how you want to address that. So it says, think processes are suspended. Should we still work on their lists that were flagged for errors? Okay, so the requirement to have timely IEPs has not been lifted. So you will still need to continue to have timely IEPs. Now, having said that, we are not going to pull another set of records to check that on May 15th. We will likely wait until the next new school year to review it again. So that's what I mean by suspended. It doesn't mean that your requirements under law are suspended. It means that the process that we use to monitor it is currently suspended to allow you the opportunity to work with children and families to make things work for them. Please repeat about the Thursday webinar. So there is a Thursday webinar, Innovations Special Education, every Thursday afternoon. I believe it's at 2 or 3 o'clock. It is on, if you go to the CDE's Facebook page, they do a Facebook Live. It's posted up there now. You can look at it again. It's on our website. And so that's the place. You do not have to register. Last week, we had over 8,000 people who were participating. This week's webinar is about innovations in special education and working with parents in different ways. So it's going to be really helpful. And then what's the difference between code 60 and 75? The code 60 is, I believe, school closure, and 75 is school emergency. I just had it up a little while ago, but that's the difference. Again, those are pretty interchangeable in this current situation. Woohoo!
Okay, so
Okay,
I
cool.
lied. I was going to give you guys a break, but we're running short of time. So we're just going to keep powering through. And if you need to take a break and continue on. So other EOI reminders. Angela?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm going to do real quick because I want to yield my time to Brandy because I think her stuff's more important. So we get kind of a silly amount of CERT 97 tickets during end of year 2. So please work with your consolidated application and reporting system, also known as CARS, coordinator to make sure that your Title I school-wide schools are tagged appropriately, because you do get a CERT error if you don't give us targeted program 122 student records if you're not flagged as a school-wide school. And then the next slide, Martha, is just a quick reminder that CalPADS is purged of direct certification and former foster data on July 1. So if you want to keep copies of that data, you are encouraged to download that for your LEA prior to those dates. Brandy's up.
No, this is Paula, I think.
Oh, yeah, you're right,
Yeah,
Paula.
She gets the
Right, so
honor of
I'll
this
keep
one.
this. I'll keep this quick too. I just wanted to point this out because there's often confusion about this. But the cohort report in CalPADS, which will start, I believe, April 13th, will start running, and so you can actually see who is in your cohort. That cohort report basically reflects the 4-year adjusted cohort rate at the ACGR, which is required for federal reporting and is used as a big piece of the graduation rate indicator that's on the dashboard. The California School Dashboard includes then the 4-year ACGR, but they also include a 5-year graduation rate, and they kind of combine those two things. So you're never going to look at the cohort report in CalPADS. It's not going to be exactly the same as your dashboard indicator, because it also includes this 5-year rate. And then you have the DAS grade 12 graduation rate, which is also on the dashboard. And there are no reports in CalPADS that reflect either the 5-year rate, the dashboard rate, or the 12-year grade 12 graduation rate. But all of that data, all of those rates are based on the poll from the CalPADS ODS, which occurs at the same time as the end of year certification deadline. So this year, unless it changes, it's August 28th. So it's really important to look at, I believe it's the next slide. Well, actually, this is just some information more specifically about the 4-year ACGR in terms of the timelines and what the dates are. But if you go to the next slide, it's really, really important to review 15.2, the cohort report. It's an ODS report, so you don't certify that, but that report has all sorts of really important information about the cohort. In particular, it shows for your cohort, for example, which students were A to G, which students had the seal of biliteracy, some of those pieces that are included in the CCI, the College Career Indicator. So often what happens is LEAs during fall 1, when they're looking at the 1-year grad reports, want to change their A to G indicators. It's too late by then. If this report had been reviewed during the end of year window, and those issues were identified then and fixed then there wouldn't be that problem. So even though this is not a certification report, in some ways you should treat it as such, because it is really, it's an important one to review and look at. This year, as I mentioned earlier, not in this cohort report, but in the cumulative enrollment report that's a part of end of year 3, there will be a filter for those students who are your 1-year graduates, okay, which is different from any of these cohort or rates. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say on that. And there's going to be more information as how to verify that data in Brandy's section, which
And then we've labeled Brandy's section EOI checklists.
Okay, so I just really briefly wanted to go through a lot of these submissions and tell you the importance. First of all, why are the data used? So we're going to talk about end of year 1, which is our course completion and career technical education data submission. So the CTE data in the submission are used to identify completer counts for our new Perkins 5 legislation. It's also used to identify completers for purposes of the Career and College Readiness Indicator in the California School Dashboard. Now, in the course completion data submission, obviously now we're collecting Carnegie units as part of a data exchange that we have with the migrant student information exchange at the federal level. But also the important components of end of year one course completion are making sure that you've identified all students that have earned college credit for purposes of the California School Dashboard, and all students that are completing leadership military science courses, because if a student takes at least 2 years of a leadership military science course, they're counted as a measure of preparedness for the California School Dashboard. Next slide. Okay, so for end of year one, you want to make sure that that all of your CTE completers have been appropriately identified in your student information system. Really important to note, for the dashboard, CTE completers can complete pathways that are not necessarily taught by CTE credentialed teachers for purposes of the dashboard. Okay, so all CTE completers, all kids completing at least 300 hours of a specific pathway should be identified, whether or not the course was identified as CTE, IG, or Perkins fundable, okay, which essentially is your high quality CTE. You want to make sure to identify everybody and make sure that your CTE coordinators are identifying all of those kids that completed a 300-hour pathway. Ensure that you've got all your local courses mapped to college credit course codes, or if it's a CTE course, you want to make sure that it's mapped to the CTE course code and that you're identifying an instructional level of that course of dual credit or college credit only. So the 23 and 24 values in the instructional level code. Ensure that you've got your local courses for ROTC or Leadership Military Science mapped to the appropriate Leadership Military Science code, because that's again used in the dashboard. And then ensure that your vendor is actually translating credits earned into Carnegie units. So I did get a question yesterday about, whether or not vendors should be translating partial Carnegie units, and the answer is yes. So for a lot of these kids, they may have only been able to complete one semester of a 2-semester course, and normally that 2 semesters would have equaled 10 credits, which would very likely result in 1 Carnegie unit. So if they only earned 5 credits, then the vendor should translate that into 0.5 Carnegie units. Next slide. Okay, so for end of year 3, what are the important points and components of end of year 3? So first of all, cumulative enrollment. It's really important that you review these reports in detail because they're the basis for the denominators for your cohort graduation rates, your suspension and chronic absenteeism rates for the dashboard and for DataQuest. And now new for 2019-20, the 1-year grad counts. And so what we're talking about is when the feds require an annual count of graduates, right? So this isn't related to a specific cohort. It's a count of graduates, your annual graduates, or what we're calling 1-year graduates. And then finally, your cumulative enrollment reports are really important for the identification of your student groups for accountability. So socioeconomically disadvantaged, special education, English learners, homeless, foster, migrant, military families. What I did want to point out about this, though, is remember, we do have a special education data submission that you're certifying in end of year 4. Okay, so you really need to make sure that the data that you are certifying in the end of year 4 submission aligns with the special education data in your cumulative enrollment reports, right? So, in terms of order of submission, it would probably be best to certify your SPED submission, your end of year 4 submission before you actually certify your end of year 3. So that way you ensure the counts of students that are identified as SPED in your cumulative enrollment report are the same as what are identified in your end of year 4 submission. Incident data. The incident data are obviously used for the suspension rate for the dashboard and DataQuest. Additionally, there is expulsion data that we do report on DataQuest that's pulled from the incident data. And then brand new, because of AB 2657 and Education Code 49005.1, the restraint and seclusion data for state and federal reporting, and ultimately it'll also end up on DataQuest. The student attendance summary data, that chronic absenteeism rate is used for the California School Dashboard as well as federal reporting. Okay, so for cumulative enrollment, just ensure that all students with primary enrollments, and actually secondary and short-term enrollments, anywhere from July 1st through June 30th are reflected in the cumulative enrollment reports. One of the things you need to be aware of, because we've seen it in the past, is if your cumulative enrollment count on that report is actually greater than your census day enrollment count, because both of those counts are displayed on that report, you've got a problem. Okay, so you need to make sure you ensure that your cumulative enrollment count is at least equal to or greater than your census day enrollment count. Next slide. Okay, so for end of year 3 incidents, here's what you want to make sure of. You want to make sure that all incidents resulting from violations of Ed Code sections 48900 and 48915 have been reported for all students, including any students served at NPS sites. And this is regardless of the outcome, regardless of the result, right? You may have done other means of correction, or they may have been suspended or expelled. But regardless of the outcome and duration of the removal, you need to report all of these incidents. You need to report all incidents of restraint or seclusion for general education and students with disabilities. This includes, and most importantly includes, students that are attending non-PS or non-public, non-sectarian schools. Remember that these incidents of restraint and seclusion do not have to be tied to an Ed Code offense, okay? LEAs are required to report incidents that occurred at NPS sites. Here is the link to the training that we did provide to those NPS sites. Again, if you are having issues with specific NPS sites and you're unable to obtain any of these data from those sites, please send in a service ticket so that we can assist in supporting the NPS sites and getting the data to you that you need for submission for end of year 3. Okay, the other thing is double check schools that generate a CERT 71 error. Okay, no incident or no discipline data was submitted for a particular school. Okay, we realize that if you're a totally online or virtual school, you're not going to have these data. But if you are a school, a seat-based school that was in session up until beginning of March, the likelihood that you had absolutely no incidents, no restraint, no seclusion, no violations of Ed Code 48900 or 48915 that may have resulted even in other means of correction, the likelihood of that happening is slim to none, particularly if your enrollment is pretty high. So make sure that you get someone's signature that certifies, nope, I had absolutely nothing to submit for this school. Because it could result in some cases in an automatic color assignment on the dashboard, and you don't want to have that happen. Make sure that you get the discipline data submitted, even if it resulted in other means of correction. Okay, the other thing is make sure that students who were absent in the student absence summary due to out-of-school suspension for at least one full day, you have to make sure that they have those equivalent discipline records, incident, results, and offenses. Okay, if they were suspended out of school for at least one full day, they should have that discipline file. You will not be able to certify your end of year 3 if that error exists. And then finally, duration days should reflect all days a student was removed from instruction. One thing I should point out, and clarification I got from the accountability office, was that they've made a decision that if a student was suspended any duration of a day throughout the year, that will count as a suspension in the dashboard. It will also count as a suspension in DataQuest. They're trying to align those two systems. So this is a change from last year because the Accountability Office was actually taking a look at the duration of a suspension or several suspensions for a student. And if it was at least one cumulative day, they were counting that as a suspension on the dashboard. Now, any suspension of any duration will be counted as a suspension on the dashboard. Next slide. Okay, report all incidents, results for each incident for a student. Okay, so let me be really clear about this. Last year, you were only reporting the final disciplinary action. Now you will be reporting all results for an incident, which means if they had in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, and ultimately were expelled, you would be reporting 3 incidents for that student. Okay, that's what should be coming up for CALPADS. The Accountability Office has not made a decision yet as to whether or not, if a student was ultimately expelled, whether or not they're going to be counting those previous suspensions as part of the suspension rate in the dashboard, right? They're still deciding that. You need to report any increment of a day of suspension. And duration is required for suspensions in and out of school and expulsion. It is not required for any of the other result codes. Okay. And then finally, you should be doing this. Your site administrators should be ensuring that no students are expelled K-12 solely for defiance or disruption. So that's code 511 or 48900K, right? That cannot be the only offense if you're expelling a student. And you cannot suspend students in K-3 solely for defiance or disruption either. Next slide. Okay, so this is a draft of our new incident report, which training will be coming on these reports, but it looks a little bit different, right? Usually you're used to seeing your counts of expulsions, suspensions in and out of school across the top in represented in columns. Now it's changed a little bit. You'll see a row for every incident result type, including your restraint and seclusion. So the questions you need to be answering and looking at in this report are, what are your total expulsions? Because that's going to be posted on DataQuest. What are your total in and out of school suspensions? Remember, those are going to be both on DataQuest and the dashboard. When you're looking at your suspensions, you can use some of the filters in this report also to apply them to the specific accountability subgroups, your students with disabilities, your English learners, your migrant students, your homeless students. Okay, you can apply those filters to kind of get a sense of which of those students are actually going to be counted on the dashboard. And compare these totals, the total count of students suspended, to your cumulative enrollment numbers. That would give you an idea of what your suspension rates might be. The other thing that's super, super important for this year, folks, make sure you're reporting information not only for your students with disabilities related to restraint and seclusion, but also for your general education students. If you're reporting no incidents of restraint or seclusion for your gen ed students, that's sort of a red flag. Okay, so just be cognizant of the fact that we're looking at it at a state level. So you should be looking at it at a local level. Next slide. Okay, so for chronic absenteeism, please look at any school that is reporting 100% perfect attendance and make sure that that's accurate and correct, okay? You wanna make sure that your vendors are pulling that extract correctly, but more importantly, you wanna make sure that your attendance clerks are using their attendance codes appropriately. Make sure that you are following up on any school that's marked with 100% perfect attendance. So make sure adjustments are made to the expected attendance days for any students that were on maternity or paternity leave, okay? If you guys are gonna be required to submit the STAS file this year, the days that you have these emergency closures will not be considered days they were expected to attend. But again, you need to work with your student information system vendors to make sure that you're using the correct codes to mark that as an emergency school closure day. Okay. Again, work with your student information system vendors. They've all put out guidance on how to do this in your student information systems. Okay, ensure any student that's being reported as absent for at least one full day due to out-of-school suspension, make sure they have those discipline files, because again, you will not be able to certify. It's actually Cert 127. So missing student incident data. That's a fatal error unless you correct that error in the STAS and submit the discipline records. You won't be able to certify end of year 3. Next slide. Okay.
Going back to Shiloh. Oh, still you?
Yeah, I think it's me, but she can chime in. So for end of year 4, this is our SPED submission. So again, this is used to determine student counts and specifically program exits for IDEA. So we are required to report students that are exiting the special education program annually at the end of the year. Additionally, they use this submission for special education monitoring, and it's also to determine and to solidify the District of Special Education accountability. We're going to be providing a new extract, and I think, did someone already talk about that?
Yes.
Okay.
Briefly, we mentioned it, but I think there's some notes on it.
Yeah, so there's a new extract we're going to be providing that tells you when the district that's reporting the data is different from the district that's actually accountable for that student for special education purposes. And it matters because next year or this coming year in the fall 2020 dashboard, all accountability for students with disabilities is going to roll back to the District of Special Education accountability for all of the indicators in the dashboard. And so the only exception is charter schools, because charter schools will always retain accountability for all of the students enrolled, and they get their own dashboard in the California school dashboard. Special education services, that file is used for monitoring at CDE. So, and then the post-secondary status file, it's post-school outcomes for purposes of reporting to the federal government for IDEA. And we talked about it already. So it's the outcomes of students with disabilities who exited secondary education in 2018-19. Okay. So remember, you're reporting data for students with disabilities for any transactions or meetings that occur as a result of initial evaluations for Part C, Part B, their annual IEP meetings, any additional IEP meetings that weren't necessarily annual meetings. Sometimes they're actually exit meetings. They're triennial meetings or meetings to amend an IEP. You should be doing this on a regular basis. I saw questions earlier about when should we start submitting the SPED files? And folks, you need to do this on a continuous basis. You're correct that the certification validation errors are not going to trigger until we open the end of year submission in May. However, you could be resolving a lot of the input errors that prevent you from getting your data even into the system. So please continue to do this on a regular basis. The data that you're submitting on a regular basis, at some point, CDE is going to be using for districts who've been selected for special education monitoring. So rather than asking you for a lot of these data, they're going to pull it directly from CALPADS. Okay. Additionally, this is going to become even more important next year for students who require accommodations and designated supports. You've got to make sure that these data are updated very frequently. You should be doing this on a weekly basis. Some districts I talk to are actually doing it every single day. Okay, so for end of year 4 checklist. Remember that this submission is capturing all students who've received parental consent. So now it's different from fall 1, because fall 1, we were only capturing students that were on active plans on census day. For end of year 4, we're capturing all students who were referred and have received parental consent for evaluation anytime between July 1 and June 30th. The other thing, if they're pending evaluation on June 30th, we're capturing those kids as well. So the amount of students in the end of the 4 submission is even larger. Some of those evaluations may have resulted in a determination that the student was ineligible for special education. We're still capturing information on those students, regardless of the eligibility determination. The other thing you're going to have to ensure this year and for end of year 4 is that you've identified all the services that have been prescribed in that student's IEP, IFSP, or ISP. Okay. Any student who has exited special education, meaning they are no longer eligible, you need to make sure that those students' exit date and exit reason is populated. You may notice, for those of you on the special education side of the house, that when you're submitting these data up to CALPADS, that the following exit types from your special education data systems are not being represented in CALPADS. So what I'm talking about are transfers, students that are high school completers, and students that are dropouts. The reason your vendors are no longer sending those exits up is because those are more school-related exits. And so CALPADS really only needs to know a special education program exit reason and date if the student is no longer eligible for services. Okay? And then the last thing is make sure that you've identified all of the kids that have to be surveyed that exited secondary education in 2018-19 so that they can be reported in the post-secondary transition, or not, sorry, I did it. I shouldn't have done it. Post-secondary status file, not post-secondary transition status. So the post-secondary status file is going to contain responses and post-secondary follow-up information for students with disabilities who exited secondary education in 2018-19. And then finally, you want to make sure you review our new District of Special Education Accountability extract, okay? So what this does is it asks districts to confirm, in fact, where another district is saying you are the District of Special Education Accountability, you want to make sure that's correct, because another district could list your district as being accountable for a student with disabilities. And so it's really, really important that your accountability coordinators, as well as your special education data coordinators, are reviewing the District of Special Education Accountability extract. We will be providing more training on how to use that extract as soon as it's developed and it's finished. Okay, so for the adjusted cohort graduation rates, remember, Paula talked about a lot of the operational data, store data that you need to make sure is updated, okay? Sometimes this is in your cohort reports and you'll be able to see, based on filters, which students are meeting these specific measures for purposes of the dashboard. But you have to make sure all of these things are updated. So first of all, your student exit codes and completion statuses. You need, it's important for the identification of students in the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate, the 5-year rate, and the 1-year dashboard alternative status school rate. So make sure you've got the appropriate exit codes and completion statuses. Make sure students are identified as meeting A through G, okay? Really important when you're looking at the cohort report, there is no column that says this is the count of students that met A through G. You actually have to apply a filter. Okay, so folks, if you're not using that filter on 15.1, you are doing yourself a disservice. Make sure you use the filter options on report 15.1. Seal of biliteracy is used for the career and college readiness indicator. Okay, there is also a filter on 15.1. Work-based learning indicators, they are potential career and college readiness indicators. Okay, there's 5 work-based learning indicators that are currently submitted on the student enrollment file. Those are included in the cohort report. And then there's 2 work-based learning indicators submitted on the SPED file. Those are not included on the cohort report. Okay, so there's other ways that you're going to have to verify those data, which we'll talk about. And then finally, your post-secondary transition status indicator. This is used to exclude adult age students with disabilities and transition programs from the DAS 1-year cohort. Next slide. Okay, so just make sure you're updating your exit codes and completion statuses, marking students as meeting A through G requirements. That's on the student enrollment file. The seal of biliteracy, earning the seal of biliteracy, again, that's on the student enrollment file, as well as all of the work-based learning indicators. You want to make sure that you've, if they're yes/no indicators. Post-secondary transition status indicator is also on the SCNR. And then ensure all of your SPED indicators for work-based learning have been populated. And again, those are in your SPED systems, SACE, Cyrus, Fawcett, Welligent. It's important to point out that the names and definitions of these specific work-based learning indicators for students with disabilities have been changed to be more broad, right? So 14.47 now reflects transitioned work-based experience, where they're actually getting work experience in the workplace. 14.48 is classroom-based work exploration. Okay, so they're learning about work exploration in a course or classroom. So this is different because the indicators before were specific to Department of Rehabilitation and Workability. Okay, so they've been broadened. So make sure your special education staff are appropriately completing these indicators in your special education data systems. Next slide. Okay, post-secondary transition. Just so you know when it's appropriate to flag this. Okay, these students have to have a grade level of 12. They should not be identified as post-secondary transition until after their initial cohort year. They have to be equal to or greater than 17 years old. They have to be students with disabilities on IEPs. They should be still enrolled in a K-12 school after their initial cohort graduation year. And they're enrolled solely for the purpose of receiving services related to transition from secondary education to college, career, independent living, and they are not generally taking courses towards receiving a high school diploma. If they're still taking coursework, they're remaining enrolled after the age of 17, 18 to complete their high school diploma requirements. They are not post-secondary transition students, so do not flag them as such. It's only when they are no longer taking courses towards high school diploma. Okay, we are passing it over.
Martha, I was going to suggest people are dropping because we're over time.
Yep.
Jump to the survey. So Marshall, if you could post the link to the survey. And folks, we always survey you because we like to, make sure, we're improving this meeting for you and making it a good experience. But we also, this time, we have some unique circumstances going on in the world. And so we wanted to hear from you. There's a couple of questions in there about how end of year looks from your end. That is really important. If you could fill that survey out for us, we would really appreciate it. So Marshall has in the chat box posted the link to the survey.
And I'm likely to hound you down to make sure that you fill out that survey. So please, we had over 800 people join us today, and we really do need your feedback on the upcoming EOI submission and what's going on in your local environments. Help inform us. And we love your comments. Let us know good or bad. It was a lot of information to digest here. And while we're leaving that up there, is there some questions that we need to answer? Randy, in your checklist area?
So we're getting lots of questions about how they're going to determine CTE completers if the kids didn't actually get to complete the final course. Paula, I don't know if you're still on, but I'm assuming our accountability office and CTE office will be addressing this.
Right. I mean, is the question related to if they don't complete a capstone course?
Right. So they weren't able to complete the 300 hours.
Right. Well, we can touch base with our CTE folks, but the guidance regarding course completion is posted. It's kind of a local decision as to how LEAs are going to determine whether or not students completed courses. So they might look to that guidance to see if that helps at all.
Okay, so the preferred order of the files will now be end of year 2, end of year 1, end of year 4, end of year 3. I probably blindsided CSIS with that.
Yeah, and I would say, generally speaking, yes, based on what you said, as far as, the EOI 4 helps inform EOI 3 as far as students with disability, but you also have to take into consideration the readiness of your data and staffing.
Right.
So if you have staff leaving and you need them for your discipline, you want to get that data in and verify you got it in good shape and then look at it before they take off. For the most part, you may have to go back and adjust it based on, finding a student with disability that you reported in EOI 4 somehow didn't get reported in EOI 3. So there's nothing in the system that's going to prevent you from doing EOI 4 first. We're suggesting, though, if you want to have complete, accurate data, it kind of seems like a good sequence. Some people don't have EOI 1 data. They're in elementary, so they're not going to be submitting any of that data. EOI 2 is a nice one to start with because it's minimal. But again, if you don't have targeted or school-wide programs, you have very little to report there. So then it comes down to EOI 3 and EOI 4. So.
Okay, so private school could have a valid CERT 71. As far as I know, School 002 isn't included in this validation. So remember, if they're private schools, we're not collecting discipline data from students at private schools. So School 0002 should not be included in that validation. Okay, to make sure I have this clear, the new cumulative duration days would mean that 2 half-day suspensions would end up equally 1 day of suspension. So yes, it would, the duration days that you're reporting now, remember that you're reporting all results. And so each result should respectively have its own duration. So this is different from what we did last year because we were actually asking for the cumulative duration of all removals, right? This is different. Now you're reporting a duration for each result for an incident for a student. So if they had 3 days of in-school suspension, you're going to be reporting 3 days associated with that in-school suspension. If they got 5 days of out-of-school suspension, that'll be an additional 5 days in a new record. That makes sense? Okay. How do we calculate the duration of an expulsion? I think this might be in the frequently asked questions, but it's really the amount of time that the student actually missed instruction. So if during that term of expulsion they actually enrolled elsewhere, you would only need to count the days that the student actually missed instruction as a result of the expulsion and up until the point they enrolled elsewhere. And Martha, just tell me when you need me to quit.
I'm going to let you keep going. We're still at 700 people hanging on. They want to know your answers, Brandy.
All right. So I vote for not reporting stats this year. I'm sure a lot of LEAs mirror your sentiment, but we'll have to see.
And Brandy was reading that from somebody that posted that. That's not her feelings necessarily.
Sorry. I keep forgetting they probably can't see all these. Can you repeat what you just said about if you have not reported any restraint, then something is incorrect in your database? So I'm not suggesting that in some cases, many of you may not, will not have restraint. The first thing, and Shiloh will probably tell you this as well, you really have to develop local policies and procedures that identify when it's appropriate to report and document incidents of restraint and seclusion within your districts. What we're saying is, given the definitions and given your policies and procedures, is it reasonable to think that 0 of your general education students, or students with disabilities for that matter, have had any incidents of restraint or seclusion, given your internal policies and procedures? Okay, so if you're reporting 0, you need to be able to back that up. Okay, that's all we're saying. We're not suggesting that it's wrong. We're just suggesting that it's something you may want to look into. Okay, well, the warnings from Fall 1 need to be corrected. If so, do CELPAs know how to instruct SPED departments on fixing these errors? That's a really good question, Terry. We were just talking about this the other day. So There are certain warnings that existed in fall one that we're going to make fatal for end of year. We kind of loosened a lot of the validations. We are going to be putting a flash together that outlines all of those changes that we're going to be making. With respect to providing instruction to the SPED data coordinators on how to resolve them, we can certainly look at providing some of that in our end of year trainings, Martha, would you say?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Brandy, I'm going to interrupt you real quick for some technical questions that we're getting. Marshall, they want to know if they can save the Q&A. Do you know if that's possible to do on the webinar?
I was placing answers in the Q&A. The actual Q&A process is in the back end, and it will be available once it's completed processing, because it places the answers with the questions. And if you
So
register,
wait, Marshall. So the LEAs themselves cannot do it. They have to wait for us to compile it, and we will compile the Q&A and get it posted.
That is
you as
correct.
an individual cannot do so.
That is correct. If they registered, that would make sure that we have your correct name and email address to actually send a response to you.
Second question, Marshall, thank you, is the recording of this, do we know when and where it will be available?
It usually takes approximately twice the amount of time for the processing to be done. Once the processing is done, I will edit it and pass it through Martha, and we will post it.
So meaning it's a 3-hour session, so it would take 6 hours to compile. So give us a few days, okay?
And
maybe next week.
Where does it go?
The CSIS YouTube channel.
You want to put it on the CSIS YouTube channel? We'll put it there.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've had several questions on this actually. So who's the one that performs the survey for the post-secondary outcomes for students with disabilities? So it probably varies locally, but it's always special education staff. Again, this is not something new to them. They have been performing this survey annually for a really long time. So it is generally someone at the site level even, sometimes at the district level, and depending on your organization locally, it could even be the SILPA. Okay. So Randy says, upload them on a weekly basis every single day. With the slowness of uploading into CalPads, that suggestion is offensive. I'd have to hire another staff person. So can't speak to the slowness of the system, but what I can tell you is that whatever process you establish locally, the submission of data for students with disabilities should not be tied directly to a submission window opening, because there are things that have to occur during the year that are going to require those data. And specifically, we're talking about testing. If you want to test students with the alternate assessments, or if you want to test students with the interim assessments and they need accommodations and designated supports, you will not be able to do that unless you get those records up there in a timely manner. So just submitting those files when it's time for data reporting for, say, fall one or end of year 4 is not going to be enough. So I'm not, I realize there are some system constraints, but to the best of your ability, work on submitting those files regularly.
And I'll add this, because yes, there is the slowness, but with the special ed files, if everything passes validation, it posts, it just happens. And so what takes time is people have to clean up those errors. And I get it, it's the first year, people have to figure out how to populate this data and have higher quality and how they can audit it locally. And maybe, you do it every other week and you slowly get to, you do it once a week and then you get even better, your data gets even better that you can start doing it daily, and it would be minimal interaction because your data is going to be so clean, it will just post automatically for you. And I get this year, it's a hard ask because it was brand new, but I think that's where we want to head everybody towards, is we got to have better data locally so it can go into CalPads the first time all data passing, not having the iterations of constantly sending the record up 10 times before you finally clean it up. So, and I hate to, put that on you guys right now, but that's where we would like to move towards. And so do the best you can. But like Brandy said, this data is becoming very critical, and it can't be just when a submission is running that you update CalPADS. It has to be on a regular basis, and it'll be a big deal come assessment time. Okay, on Brandy.
So no, that was great. Thanks, Martha. So I just found out that our SPED team had no idea about the SIM meeting. Okay, folks, all of your special education data staff can sign up for the listserv. And if they have not done that, there is a link to the listserv and how to sign up for the listserv on the CalPADS page. So if you just go to the CD's homepage and type in CalPADS listserv, it'll take you to a page. Forward that to them. That's how they get notification about these meetings. CELPA can also sign up for the listserv. Okay.
And I would say, Brandy, that this is a golden opportunity. As an LEA admin, we're asking you guys on a regular basis to coordinate with the special ed side of the house. And so if you got the communication, communicate with them. Hey, did you know about this? You may want to come. We learn a lot of, cool things on the sim. So, don't just leave it up to us to communicate with those folks. It's an opportunity for you guys to have that coordination among yourself. Off my soapbox.
Okay.
Thanks, Mother Martha.
Okay, so going back to suspensions, we're reporting in and out of school suspensions. Are teacher suspensions from a period reported? Okay, so this question has actually been asked several times during this webinar. Teacher suspensions. If it's a teacher suspension that results in a student being removed from a class period for that class period only, those suspensions do not need to be reported to CalPADS. It's only when they're actually referred to an administrator for an actual in-school or out-of-school suspension. Okay, so period suspensions, if it's solely for that class period, no, that teacher suspension does not have to be reported as an incident in CalPADS.
And Brandy, there's some FAQs and flashes on that. So.
Yeah, there are. So will we be able to see who is counted for 5-year rate and DAS rate? And I'm assuming, Anita, you mean in the CalPADS reports. So there are no specific reports that show kids in the 5-year rate and the DAS rate. But
However, with that new filter on the cumulative enrollment, you can get to the 1-year completer, right?
Right, the one-year completers.
Right,
Yeah.
but there's some different rules around the DAS one. We'll talk to our, because this AMART in the past has sometimes provided files that go along with the dashboard.
But Anita, there is actually a way that you can use report 8.1a in CalPADS with some very specific filters to obtain students with specific exit codes, right? So you can use, it is an ODS report, right, Martha?
Yes.
Right, so you can use that report to give you an idea of the students that would be counted for purposes of DAS. So I have a specific slide on it. It wasn't included in the SIM for obvious purposes because of the time, but I'd be happy to share it with you.
And by the way, the dashboard technical guide has the business rule of how they calculate the DAS students.
Right, it does. Do all school districts need to do end of year 2, 1, 4, and 3? So the answer is no. So end of year 1 pertains only to students grades 7 through 12, right? So elementary school districts solely will not have to do end of year 1. End of year 2, 3, and 4 are required of all districts.
So I would say with end of year 2, if you have no students in those programs, you have to certify 0. So you can't just leave it alone. You do have to, we do want to encourage that EOI2 gets certified, even if you don't report any students in those programs.
Okay. So again, we have someone saying they're getting a post-secondary status error when you exit a student during the year and then they re-enroll. Okay. So I'm assuming you mean the post-secondary status file. Remember, folks, the only time you're submitting that post-secondary status file is when the kid doesn't re-enroll, right? If they re-enroll, they have not exited secondary education. So you should only collect survey results and submit those survey results for kids who do not return.
Isn't that the flag on the SENR that they're talking about, Brandy? Not the PSTS file?
I don't know.
I don't know. So
I don't know.
I'm getting an error stating.
Yeah. So
it's
Rosario,
needed.
submit a ticket.
Yeah.
That's what I would do. Work-based learning indicators entered into special education information system. Do we then have to sync that to our student information system to be picked up in the SENR? So no, Lornie, the answer is those two specific indicators are captured in the SPED system, and those are sent to CALPADS from within the SPED file. All of the other work-based learning indicators are captured in the student information system and sent up to CALPADS. Okay, so the two work-based learning indicators that are specific to students with disabilities will not come up through the SENR. They'll come up through the SPED file. Could you repeat the order of the files again? So I think we said end of year 2, end of year 1, end of year 4, and then end of year 3.
But it's also a local decision.
Local decision.
Yeah. And Brandy, by the way, it's 12:20. I'm
Okay.
not sure if the webinar is going to turn off at 12:30. It may or may not, but we'll continue until we get turned off.
Okay.
It should not turn off. I
Okay.
promise.
Well, Martha, I mean, if essentially the meeting is over for people that are
Yeah,
not,
yes.
if you're not a diehard, you're welcome to to go eat your lunch. There's one more slide, Martha, for the next sim.
We don't know what it is. We
Yeah.
don't know when the next sim is. Sometime in October. However, based on you guys' responses in the survey, we may rethink that. Whoops. Okay, continue on, Brandy. Power through.
Okay, so just confirming, it was definitely said that a CTE completer for CALPADS purposes is 300 hours in a CTE pathway, even if the teacher is not, it's not a high quality CTE course, right? So they don't have a CTE credential. So for purposes of the California School Dashboard, they are not looking at whether or not the teacher has a CTE credential. Okay, however, for Perkins purposes, remember, if that course is being funded by Perkins or CTIG money, it requires a CTE credential teacher, okay? But for purposes of the dashboard, that is not a component they're currently looking at. Okay, so do students have to be on a CTE pathway in order to tag them for work-based learning indicators on SENR? So no, we don't have that requirement, right? So these work-based learning indicators may or may not be related to a student's CTE pathway. We're not validating that. Did I hear you correctly that CTE completer does not necessarily need to be CTE certified teacher? Again, if it's CTE funded, it requires a CTE credential teacher, but for dashboard purposes, that's not a component they're looking at.
So Brandy, if you are a CTE in that program, in that grant, and you didn't have somebody that was certified and you flagged it as such, what happens? Do you get audited?
So yeah, it would be a monitoring issue,
Okay.
right? So if you got selected for monitoring for the Perkins program, they're going to ask you to provide verification that all of your CTE teachers actually have CTE credentials in order to fund the course. So yeah, it's a monitoring issue.
And it also come up in CalSAS too, potentially.
Yeah, it would come up in CalSAS, although they don't use the end of year data. They use fall 2.
So where I was getting is CalPADS doesn't have the validation, but there are checks elsewhere and it will be determined.
Right. But here's what I really want to reemphasize is that I had a school say, well, we didn't report, we had kids complete these pathways, but we didn't report them because we thought they had to have CT credentialed teachers in order to count on the dashboard. And my response is, no, that's not true. They have to have completed a high quality CT pathway for funding purposes, but and for reporting to Perkins and CTIG, but for purposes of the dashboard, the course, may or may not be a high quality CTE course.
It's good clarification.
Okay, so for CTE sequence course, do we use the course instructional level of intro, intermediate, advanced? Okay, for CTE courses, You do not have to populate that instructional level code. Don't bother because it's already in the name of the course. It's only the instructional level code really becomes important only for college level courses. The other values that are in those courses, or like their UC honors courses, UC certified honors courses, or remedial courses, it's not a required data element. So do not bother doing it, Alejandro, for your CTE courses. It's redundant. Is there a training specifically for special education teams?
Not really. I mean, we have partnered with the special education vendors and have done data population. EOY 4 is very specific to special ed folks. We haven't yet created that material, but the rest of CALPADS submissions, it's a blend of the LEA administrator and the special ed coordinators working together to get that data up. And so we would hope that the special ed folks, if you want to know more about the submissions, that you come to the regular CALPADS submission training, which is meant for both parties.
Question to that, when will the EOY trainings be posted on the training site?
So the end of April, we'll be doing the advanced, and then starting middle of May, we will be doing the regular basic end of year training for everybody else. So middle of May to end of May.
Okay, so when will the flash be coming out? Karen, it seems like we're sending out flashes daily now. So we're working on them. So, you know.
Which flash was she talking about?
There were so many we mentioned that need to get produced.
The work-based learning.
Oh, work-based learning.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to do that in the next week or two.
How many LEAs
have all the information? What was that?
How many LEAs have certified Fall 2?
1,200. We still got 800 to go. So, you know, do the best you can in these times when we're here to help. We are working remotely and we are responding to tickets, and we are trying our best to support you guys in these awkward times.
Okay.
Rebecca was just giving us advice, or some people advice.
Right. Okay. So I'm not sure how to answer the questions in the survey. I'm assuming you're talking about the post-secondary status survey. PowerSchool and SACE are available from home, but our school site office staff are not currently working.
Maybe our actual SIM survey, because we wanted to know, you know, do the best you can, Cindy. Give us something. Put it in your comments if you want to clarify your answers.
Yes, I think it was referring to the SIM survey.
Got it. Okay. All right. So coordination of CalPads uploads and SPED uploads need to happen. Often the SPED staff starts uploading before they check with us. And right, that's a totally great point, Sherry. Remember, your SPED staff aren't going to be able to get any data in the system until they have enrollment records. So make sure that you're coordinating just like you did for Fall 1. Not sure what Niraj is referring to. Okay, this is probably a follow-up to a previous question because I'm not sure I understand the context of what you're asking. Okay, so it would be nice if there was a more detailed overview report prior to transaction submission on SACE. Error-free does not equate to good data. This is new to our SPED staff. They are used to looking only for errors. Yeah, I agree with you. A lot of the questions we've also been getting related to the SPED file have to do with things that are vendor specific. So SACE or Cyrus, and how those transactions are sent up and what reports you have available in those systems to view to make sure that the data are of good quality. So I would really encourage you to work directly with those vendors, because unfortunately we don't have a lot of control over the logic they employ in those systems. So work directly with your vendors, ask them, tell them how they can help you do your jobs a little better. Is a teacher class suspension considered an in-school suspension? So again, if they're suspended from class for that one period, you would not have to report that as an in or out of school suspension. Okay. It's only when they're referred to an administrator for actual in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension. And it usually means that the student is actually suspended for more than just that class period. Okay, so how does the PSTS record play into the surveying of special education students? I thought the SPED post-secondary fields were already included in the SPED record. So they're not in the SPED record. The specific fields for the post-secondary survey are actually going into this new PSTS file. And so you may want to talk to SACE. It probably looks, or SACE or Cyrus or whatever special education system you use, the location of those data in that system probably haven't changed. It's just they're being submitted up through a different file type in SACE. They're not in the SPED record. Okay. Let's see, I do not really understand the work-based learning indicators. Can you explain some more about these 5 codes? So B, there is, what I will tell you is just stay patient on that one. I do know that I'm working with Jenny Singh and Shiloh about the work-based learning indicators and trying to get a webinar put together to sort of explain, and obviously we'll be working with the Career Technical Education Office as well. So we want to talk through some of the questions that you guys have. So we will be putting together a webinar on the work-based learning indicators for the end of year submission really soon. So just stay tuned for that. We have a CTE teacher, but no students will complete the CTE hours. So again, folks, we're going to have to talk with our CTE office as well as our accountability office to get guidance on students who were not able to complete the pathway because of the COVID-19 crisis. So just, again, stay tuned for guidance on that. If we flag non-CTE credentialed teachers, but flag the students as CTE completers, does that mess up our post-secondary? Is it okay to include all CTE completers for post-secondary? Folks, remember that for purposes of CALPADS reporting and even reporting for purposes of, you know what, that's actually a good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if the only completers they're asking you to report are those that were in Perkins or CTIC funded courses. The only reason I want to say that the answer is no is because the submission in CALPADS, and actually even the data submission that we do to the feds, includes all LEAs, even if they weren't funded with Perkins or CTIC money. So I want to say that it includes all CTE completers, not only those that were Perkins or CTIC funded.
All right, we'll double check, but I think the funding, it's basically a funding issue, not any other issue, right? I think that's the main reason for that.
For what?
For the highly quality,
right.
The high quality whatever classes, that's what they're funding.
Right. Okay. Yes. So, but we'll get some more guidance from the CTE office. Can you please repeat the answer of reporting teacher suspensions? So you have a couple of options. So Monique, you're suggesting that you go ahead and report the ed code violation, but report that it was other means of correction. You certainly could do that. The other option is that this particular classroom suspension for this student, for that particular teacher, just would not be reported as a student incident to CALPADS, right? So you may have to report it somewhere else in your student information system. But you could certainly report it as a 300. For articulated CTE courses, the course level of 23 or 24 is where the info is captured. So yeah, if you have a CTE course that earns the student college credit, and they earn either dual credit, high school and college credit, or they earn college credit only, that's where you would indicate that a CTE course issues college credit. This, just so you know, Marianne, there is another data element that we currently capture in CalPADS. It's the CTE articulated course indicator, yes, no? Okay, so that's another place that we capture information about the fact that a CTE course is articulated. But in order for it to count for college credit purposes for the dashboard, you need to make sure you identify 23 or 24.
I'm not sure why, with
Yeah.
what I scared your cat. My stern words.
Right. Okay. Should CELPAs use query in the special education data system for unduplicated pupil count for 1920 or one of the reports from CalPADS?
Probably be our EOY4 reports, you would think, right?
Yeah, that's what I would say. I'm sure the special education data systems provide you some information, but the likelihood of them being exactly the same is.
But you would want to compare them and try to figure out and reconcile why
Right.
they are different.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure if the team has the answer. Do you know if CELA biliteracy will be mailed out normally? Hi, Quinn. As far as I haven't heard anything from our EL office or the language policy office about this, Quinn. So we can find out for you if you just want to submit a service ticket. Okay, just to repeat, remind all LEAs that CalPADS data are required to be maintained so that the data are no older than 14 days, right? So continuously submit up your enrollments and exits. Thanks, Doug. The elementary level, if a teacher class suspends a student for defiance for one period, it can actually be for the entire day. How does this get reported? I'm pretty sure it will generate an error because it's an elementary in defiance, but legally the teacher has the right. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons that we actually allow defiance or disruption. So you will get a warning that says, hey, you're suspending this student for only defiance or disruption. But it's not a fatal error because we do know that for teacher suspension specifically, that teacher actually is allowed to suspend the student, particularly at the elementary level, for only defiance or disruption. So that is allowable in ed code. That's why we don't make it a fatal, but you should make sure that for students, you know, at the secondary level, that if they're being suspended for an entire day for defiance or disruption, that it actually is a result of a teacher suspension. Okay. And do you just want me to keep going? We still have about 10 questions.
Yeah, we're getting to the bottom. And
I think we got to cut it off at some point, Martha. So pick somebody, please. We're 40 over.
Okay. Well, here's a good question because I got asked a couple of things. So are private schools considered NPS schools? Okay, really important. There's a difference between private schools and non-public, non-sectarian certified schools. Okay, non-public, non-sectarian certified schools are certified by the Department of Education to serve students with disabilities. And the IE teams make decisions to actually send students specifically to these NPS sites. NPS schools are a form of private school, but they're a specific type of private school. Private schools, meaning just, you know, St. Mary's Catholic School, for example, if they are not certified by the department to specifically serve students with disabilities, they are not an NPS school. Okay, so private schools are not always NPS schools. However, NPS schools are a form of private schools. So Barbara, I hope that answered your question. Okay, so where do we want to cut it off, Martha? You tell me.
Your mic's muted, Martha.
I'm having Marshall turn off the Q&A, so we'll.
Okay, so for charter schools who were already operating as independent study and are continuing to do so, are they to continue as normal? Do we need to adjust anything using that 229 date if they did not close and no changes have happened to them as far as their expectations for teachers and students? Paula, do you know?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Well, it's about those schools that were virtual schools anyway, and nothing's changed, right? So do they still have to make adjustments to their ADA reporting to only report through 229?
I asked that specifically to fiscal the other day, and their response, I needed to follow up with their response. But they pretty much said that they felt like the FAQs that are posted should respond to that, which sounds like it's only up until 229, but I wanted them to further clarify if there's a new enrollment subsequent to 229, and I haven't gotten a response yet.
All right, so Stephanie says it's mentioned that a class suspension is not considered an in-school suspension for a period. However, if an elementary student is suspended from class, how should this be documented? Unlike 7th through 12th grade students, they don't have periods, right? So again, how it's documented in your student information system is really up to you.
I mean, that's a local decision, really. But the main thing is we had a lot of questions about, like kids who are sent to the hallway for a little bit and all this kind of stuff. That's not what we're expecting would be reported. So the flashes, and I think there's FAQs, we tried to get at those questions. So maybe we can resend out references to what we've already sent out. Because the answers to those questions get a little bit, we always run those past our legal office. And so it's probably best to look at those flashes and FAQs and then ask us again if you have further questions.
Okay, so we were told by Aries that the 23 and 24 are only being reported at the end of the year, but not in fall 2. So B, what they're saying is that the use of those 23 and 24 codes is really most important for the end of year 4 submission. So it's very likely that Aries isn't sending those up for fall 2. And that's because it's a determination of whether or not the student earned college credit, right? And most times you don't even know that until the end of the year. So that's probably why Aries is not sending those up until the end of the year, which makes total sense. We don't really use those values for purposes of fall 2. Is there a validation? Go ahead.
These are the last 2 questions. We're ending on Stephanie.
All right. Is there a validation for CTE completers submitted via the SCTE to their respective student course completion records now that we might submit a credit, no credit scores for semester 2? So remember, the only validation that we do between the SCTE file and the course completion file is the fact that they actually took if they're reporting them as a completer, they have to have taken the completer course, right? We don't actually look at the credits earned or the grade earned in that validation.
And our accountability office is completely aware that they might have to change how they do that calculation for the CTI, since right now it's only C- or above. So they're aware of that. And they're aware of the fact that, this is course completion stuff is going to be impact 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders for the CCI. So this year it's the 12th graders. Next year it'll be the 11th graders that have this anomaly and so forth.
And actually, Stephanie's question we already answered. So, but Stephanie, I would really encourage you to look at the frequently asked questions and the flash related to suspensions.
And with that, we have answered all the questions. We will post the recording and the Q&A, and we'll communicate that out to everybody. And if I don't get a high rate of survey respondents, I am going to send you a direct email asking for your input. So
you don't want that from Martha, believe me.